On January 19th of 2021, Tara Baker was taken out of this world. Her life extinguished by the defendant in this case, Edrick Faust. Mr. Faust entered Tara's home and caught her as she was going through her morning routine. He stabbed her, brutally bashed her head, and strangled her as he forcibly raped her, sodomized her orally, and sodomized her anally. When she was discovered by firefighters and police, her hair still smelled like shampoo. Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard the evidence in this case for 2 weeks and went through about a week of jury selection before that. And we're here at the closing argument after a family has waited 25 years for justice for their daughter. And it's time for you to write the last chapter of this story. The state, in closing argument, is afforded the opportunity to go both first and last in the summation. The reason for that is that we bear the burden of proof in this case. And that burden is guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. It's a burden that I accept readily. The burden never shifts, and the defendant is not required to present any evidence ever. And it's a burden that I accept readily on behalf of the state of Georgia because it is a burden that we meet by bringing you the truth, the facts, and the evidence in the case. Not conjecture, not unsupported speculation, not statements about the evidence that end up being false after you actually hear it, but the truth and the facts of this particular case. You have a 12-count indictment that you will consider. And during this initial portion of our closing argument, we are not intending to tell you the same things that we're going to tell you at the end. I respect your time. I'm going to try my best not to repeat myself. As it relates to count one is malice murder. And the law in this case will come from Judge Lott, and you should look to her jury charge in order to determine the law that applies to this case. But I expect that Judge Lott will instruct you that in count one, malice murder, it requires that the state prove that Mr. Faust did unlawfully and with malice aforethought on January 19th of 2001 caused the death of Tara Baker, a human being, by strangling her with a cord and stabbing her. And in count 2 through count 5, I believe Judge Lott will instruct you that Mr. Faust is charged with felony murder as it relates to the felony offenses of burglary, aggravated sodomy, and rape. And I believe that what she will instruct you as it relates to those offenses will come in the charge, and we will discuss that. After those offenses of burglary, aggravated sodomy, 2 counts, rape, as well as possession of a knife during the commission of a felony, you will receive further instructions. And one of those instructions that Judge Lott is going to give you is about what we just discussed, the issue of reasonable doubt. And I think what the judge will instruct you in part is a reasonable doubt means just what it says. It is a doubt of a fair-minded, impartial juror who is honestly seeking the truth. It is a doubt based on common sense and reason. And I know sometimes it can be difficult as a juror to understand how you should weigh the evidence, but I think that the end of that second sentence is maybe the most instructive as to what a juror's role is. And a juror's role is to seek out the truth in the evidence that is presented before you. Your job is not to seek out doubt, it is to seek out truth. And the truth in this case is that Mr. Faust is guilty of each of the offenses for which he is charged in the indictment. I think it's important when we discuss malice murder to talk about what is required of the state in order to prove that. The state does not have to prove premeditation. The state does not have to prove motive. Malice aforethought in the state of Georgia does not mean premeditation. The state has to prove that Mr. Faust caused the death of another person, Ms. Baker. He did so unlawfully, meaning without any type of justification, and he did so with malice aforethought. And malice, as the term is used here, is not necessarily ill will or hatred. It is rather an unlawful intent to kill. This, as I stated before, the state does not have to prove premeditation in order to prove murder. If a killing is done with malice, it is murder regardless of how briefly the malicious intent existed. No specific length of time is required for malice to arise in the defendant's mind. Malice may be formed in a moment, and instantly a fatal wound may be inflicted. The malice in this case is clear. I'm not going to display in front of you now those images from both the autopsy and the crime scene that you've been subjected to. I know that they are not pleasant images to look at, but if you are looking for evidence of malice in this case, the manner in which Ms. Baker's life was taken was all the evidence of malice that's necessary to support a conviction under the laws of the state of Georgia. I think that the judge is also going to instruct you on felony murder. And although she will give you an instruction at the end, I think it's worth bringing up for you as you consider the evidence as argued to you by the attorneys in these closing arguments. And I think what the judge is going to instruct you is that for felony murder, the state must prove that the defendant caused the death of another person by committing a felony. In causation, as it relates to felony murder, I'd expect the judge will instruct you that you may find the defendant guilty of felony murder if you believe that he or she caused the death of another person by committing the felony of, and in each count it will have the predicate felony or the underlying felony that's the basis for those felony murder counts. By committing the felony of whichever felony is the predicate, regardless of whether he intended the death to occur. There must be some causal connection between the felony and the death. Felony murder is not established simply because the death occurred at the same time as or shortly after the felony was attempted or committed. The felony must have directly caused the death or played a substantial and necessary part in causing the death, regardless of when the death ultimately occurred. And so when we're talking about burglary as a predicate act for felony murder, what we're talking about is the commission of that burglary, the entry into the home in order to commit the sexual offenses that are relayed in the burglary being a substantial and necessary part of causing the death. The evidence in this case establishes that. It also establishes the predicate felony of aggravated sodomy being, again, a substantial and necessary part in causing the death in this case. It also establishes the evidence in the case that the rape and then the aggravated assault of strangulation and stabbing Miss Baker as predicate acts of the felony murder also played a substantial step in causing her, substantial and necessary part in causing her death. So that's what felony murder means. It means committing a felony that plays a substantial and necessary part in causing the death of Miss Baker in this case. I know that's not something that jurors typically know of necessarily as it relates to the way that the law is applied to those circumstances, so I felt like it was important to go over those things with you. The possession of a knife during commission of a felony, I think the arson in the first degree is pretty clearly self-explanatory. It's clearly from when Mr. Faust takes the blanket out of the living room, lights it on fire, and goes to start the fire in Miss Baker's bedroom. Possession of a knife during commission of a felony. Obviously, the knife used in this matter is longer than 3 inches in length. I think that's been clearly established by the evidence in the case. And then that knife was used in a felony involving another person, that being Miss Baker's murder as alleged in the indictment. So as you're listening to the evidence, those are the things that you are listening for. As it relates to the rape charge, that is carnal knowledge, meaning that Mr. Faust penetrated Miss Baker's vagina with his penis forcibly and against her will. The evidence of force and against her will is very clear from the images from the crime scene. As it relates to the offense of aggravated assault in count 5, I think that the aggravated assault being the strangulation with a cord and the stabbing. As it relates to the 2 counts of aggravated sodomy, one is for the oral sodomy, forcibly and against her will, that was performed by Mr. Faust on Miss Baker, and then the other one is the anal sodomy, forcibly and against her will, performed by Mr. Faust on Miss Baker. Ladies and gentlemen, the next thing that I want to talk to you about is what is evidence and what is not evidence. Evidence is what you hear from the witness stand and the exhibits that are emitted, the videos that were played for you, and the things that will go back with you into the jury room. What I say is not evidence, whether it was an opening statement, whether it was in questions that I asked witnesses, or anything else that I've said to you. This closing argument is not evidence. It is my argument to you about what the evidence shows. The same thing goes for the defense in this case. Nothing that Mr. Cruz says is evidence. No questions that Mr. Cruz asked are evidence. When there is a conflict between what you've heard on the witness stand and what it is that Mr. Cruz says or what I say, remember, what we say is not evidence. So when Mr. Cruz says to you that the hairs that were found in Miss Baker's hands were going to be proven to be Mr. Melton's hairs, that...
Excuse me. May I see counsel at the bench, please?
Ladies and gentlemen, you need to remain.
Another outburst like that, those of you who have made the outburst are going to be asked to leave and you will not be able to return. I don't know if everyone who made a comment heard me say this when I first got started, but this is a, well, I'll just leave it at that. If there are any other comments like that by anyone in the audience, I'm going to stop the proceedings. You will be escorted out by the deputy, and you will not be able to return. And that goes for everybody that's in the audience. And I hope that I've made myself clear about that. Thank you very much. All right, your objection is?
Mr. Cruz demonstrated to you about Miss Baker fighting off her assailant while his hands were around her throat, clawing at his hands, and then reaching up and ripping his hair out. Remember what the evidence actually was. The evidence that actually came from the hair analysis told you that the hairs in Miss Baker's hands were her own hairs. Okay, so remember that when we're talking about what the attorneys say versus what the evidence is. When things have been said or claimed that were not supported by testimony from the witness stand, whatever they may be, those are not facts for you to consider because they are not facts that are established by any evidence in the case. I want you to pay close attention to Mr. Cruz as he makes his closing argument to you. And when he gets done, I'll come back to talk to you about the actual facts and evidence in this case that prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant, Mr. Edrick Faust, is guilty of each and every offense in this indictment.
I want to thank you all. In regards to the state's comments regarding what we say, I agree. Okay, so if you heard things in opening that didn't come out during the trial, I agree. You cannot consider that. One thing you will learn is, or as Mr. Yalomachili said, the state has the burden. So typically we decide what we're going to present based on what we feel is the strength of the state's case. The case presented to you these last 3 weeks, including jury selection, is what can only be described as a story of negligence, a carelessness for the life and the death of Ms. Baker that extends far past indifference. As you've heard through this trial, we have brought you more facts about Ms. Baker than the state. We've brought you information regarding how Ms. Baker was, that she believed in justice, that she believed in fairness, and that she believed in listening to everything before making a decision. She's similar to a jury. The state is bringing Mr. Faust before you today to accuse him of crimes that he did not commit. And of course, you don't just take my words for it, you look at the evidence. The state presented no evidence that Mr. Faust, if it's his DNA, you have to decide if it's his DNA, and we'll get into that. But the state presented no evidence that Mr. Faust's DNA means murder. The state presented no evidence that Mr. Faust's DNA means rape. The state presented no evidence that Mr. Faust's DNA means burglary. The state presented no evidence that Mr. Faust's DNA means arson or any of the other charges that they charged him with in this indictment. Mr. Faust and everyone involved in this case would like to thank you for your time, your dedication, and your willingness to put 100% of your attention into this case. And put aside your very, we understand how important it is, but your very important personal and business matters. But most of all, I want to thank you all for your courage. Because courage is what this moment demands. Not just to listen, but to stare directly at injustice and say, not here, not now, not on our watch. And that's what you're being asked to do. Stare down injustice. I want to start with a simple truth. You folks, not us, not anybody in this courtroom, you folks are the last line of defense between an innocent man and a system that has tried to break him. They falsely accused him, and they tried mightily to bury the truth. This case was corrupted from the start. It was corrupted by biases. It was corrupted by political pressure and a need to avoid admitting a mistake was made or mistakes were made in the initial investigation that you all heard about. And most fatally, it was corrupted by a lead investigator whose misconduct infected every single part of this case from the top to bottom. In our opening statement last week, we told you what questions to ask. We gave you a list of questions in our opening statement that the state would need to answer. And we warned you about the questions. We told you that the state will not be able to answer these questions with the evidence that they presented. And we begged you to try to answer those questions with the evidence that the state had presented. Those questions were, how does Mr. Faust's DNA simply being present in Ms. Baker's body, and again, you have to determine what the facts are. You may say it's not his DNA, but we're going to say worst case scenario if you say it is. How does Mr. Faust's DNA simply being present in Ms. Baker's body, along with 2 other DNA profiles, establish that he is the person that killed Ms. Baker? The next question, when did Mr. Faust's DNA get in Ms. Baker's body? Where's that evidence? If Mr. Faust killed Ms. Baker, how did Mr. Faust get into Ms. Baker's home? How did Mr. Faust get away from Ms. Baker's home unseen? If he committed the crime in the morning hours, I believe they said between 8 and 8:30 from the testimony in the stand when the individuals were seen walking in the neighborhood. If Mr. Faust killed Ms. Baker, why was the hair that was found in her hand, around her body, and on her body that did not belong to her, why was it of Caucasian origin? What evidence does the state have placing Mr. Faust in Ms. Baker's home? How does the evidence that the state has presented to you support that Mr. Faust broke into Ms. Baker's home, sodomized Ms. Baker, viciously beat Ms. Baker, raped Ms. Baker, strangled Ms. Baker, stabbed Ms. Baker in the neck, and set her apartment on fire while Ms. Baker lay dying? If Tara Baker was Chris Melton's future fiancée, why would he forget whether she told him she would be alone the night before her death? You have to decide if that's something an individual that's been with somebody for 2 years would forget. Is that something a boyfriend or a husband or a fiancé would forget if their loved one was killed due to being home alone? You have to ask yourself, how did Mr. Melton respond to Ms. Baker's death? And you heard the testimony on that, and we'll talk about that. But what I ask you to do is pay attention to the physical evidence. We're going to talk about the physical evidence. Pay attention to the science. The science is the most important thing in this case. The state wants you to believe that the DNA is everything. The science is going to be the most important thing in this case, and we're going to talk to you about the science. Pay attention to the medical facts that were given to you. But also pay attention to the integrity, which is the very essence, the integrity of this investigation. But you also saw something during the course of the trial that none of us might have expected. Something that should sadden us all. Something that maybe would anger us. On full display, you saw the lengths to which some, and only some, police officers will go to avoid admitting there were mistakes made in the investigation of Ms. Baker's case, to protect their own at the expense of the rest of us, at the expense of Mr. Faust, who is an innocent man. Before we examine the evidence in this case, which we absolutely will do, we need to understand the very foundation of the entire system of justice in which we operate. It is the bedrock on which this entire system is built. reasonable doubt. And that term, you all have heard it before, but this term isn't just legal jargon. It isn't just a technicality. And it's not a slogan. It is a constitutional shield that protects the innocent and prevents the government from punishing without proof. The state has the high burden to prove every single element of every single offense that they've charged Mr. Faust with. And they have to prove that beyond a reasonable doubt, which simply means a doubt for which a reason can be given. Not a vague or arbitrary doubt, but a doubt based upon common sense and reasoning, as the state advised you. But I want to emphasize this because it sounds complicated, but it's very simple. It's a doubt for which a reason can be given. This doubt can be, and the judge will tell you this. What I'm about to tell you, you're going to hear the judge say the exact same thing. This doubt can be based upon a consideration of the state's evidence as a whole, a lack of evidence, or a conflict in the evidence. And those powerful words are not just some legal jargon. They're a mandate. They're your obligation. They're your community's protection against injustice. In our system of justice, Edrick Faust sits here today, presumed innocent. He's cloaked in the presumption of innocence, and it protects him like a suit of armor from the top of his head to the bottom of his feet. And that presumption is not fragile. It doesn't just disappear because there's a charge that comes about, or because somebody has a badge, or because the state has a theory. That presumption stands firm unless and until the state clears that high burden. The highest bar the law provides, proof beyond a reasonable doubt. That means at the end of this case, at the end of this trial, you think about one or more of the charges. You think, you know what? Maybe that's true. It might be true what the state is saying. Then, if that's your feeling, you vote not guilty. If you think it's possibly true or probably true, your vote must be not guilty. If someone among you think it's likely true or even very likely to be true, your vote is not guilty. Because none of those standards, maybe, might be, possibly, probably, likely, very likely, none of those meet the extraordinary burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, guilt beyond a reasonable doubt has best been explained two ways, in two different ways. One is pretty simple. We've already discussed the first way. It's a doubt for which you can state a reason. That's the simple. If you can state a reason for your doubt, that is the first definition of reasonable doubt. But that reason has to be based upon common sense and reason, right? We can't say an alien came down, committed this crime, and left evidence of Mr. Faust being there. That's fanciful. That isn't a reasonable doubt. A reasonable doubt is based upon common sense and reason. So don't violate your oath and say, well, hey, I think it's a conspiracy theory. Some other people did it, and they're just snatching up Mr. Faust. Let me make that clear. Some other people that have not been mentioned in this case, some other people in another country, aliens, animals, whatever. That is not a reasonable doubt, because that wouldn't be based upon common sense and reason. But if you could state one reason, a reason to doubt the state's case, your verdict must be not guilty. Now, as a jury, you have rules and principles just like we have them in our homes and in our businesses. We also have them in court. So you find a truthful verdict within the confines of the law that is given to you by the honorable court. So if you want to say the state never presented evidence showing how Mr. Faust's DNA means rape, there is no physical evidence or witnesses connecting Mr. Faust to Ms. Baker's home. And also add the fact that Dr. Falzone, who testified here, told us based on the injuries to Ms. Baker's anus, she was sexually assaulted anally. Dr. Falzone told us that. And before I follow up with the evidence, I want to mention one thing that is very important. The judge will tell you that you cannot presume that Mr. Faust in any manner acted with criminal intent. The state has to present evidence of that. You can't just say, well, his DNA is present, that's enough for me. It's his DNA. Well, he didn't explain the DNA, so he's guilty. The state has to explain Mr. Faust's DNA. The state charged Mr. Faust with rape. So the state has to show you, how does his DNA mean rape? Otherwise, that presumes criminal intent, and it violates the oath you've taken to follow the law given by the honorable court. The judge will also tell you to convict Mr. Faust. Not only must the facts be consistent with Mr. Faust committing all of the acts in the indictment, but they also must exclude every other reasonable theory other than Mr. Faust's guilt. Chris Melton killing Ms. Baker is not only a reasonable theory, it is supported by the evidence. And I'll start with Ms. Ashley Hinkle. She was the last witness you heard from. If you'll go to the last page on that. And again, no evidence came in about anybody running off, so I don't want you to consider that. You can't consider that. But this is what led us to say our case is where it needs to be. Ms. Hinkle, the states, this wasn't our DNA expert. This isn't somebody we hired. This isn't somebody we paid. This is somebody they brought in to support their case. Ms. Hinkle testified that DNA doesn't last in the anus for 5 days. And you may remember me asking her about the test where they had 5 swabs, and they tested the 5 swabs, and all 5 anal swabs came back negative. But at most, as we have, 3 days. And that's best case scenario. One of the journals said 2 days, but we'll give them the benefit of the doubt. We'll say 3 days. And the state came before you and said, well, it's a drainage theory. It's a drainage theory. You even had Chris Melton, and you have to decide how he knows this. I don't know where he got it from, but I think I know where he got it from, but you have to decide where he got it from. He took the stand under oath and said, well, my DNA was there probably because of drainage. But this is the issue with the state's drainage theory. If we concede, I don't agree with it, but you have to decide what's truthful and what's not truthful. But if we concede that Mr. Melton was with Ms. Baker on Sunday and DNA only lasts 3 days, his DNA would have been gone by Wednesday. So for Ms. Baker to be killed on Friday and Mr. Melton's DNA to show up, it doesn't fit the physical evidence. It doesn't fit the science. And you may have heard the state ask a question, well, does the clock reset? And you heard Ms. Hinkle say, yeah, but it will require penetration. So if it number one, it wouldn't be there, but let's say hypothetically, it requires penetration. Whose DNA profile was the only identifiable DNA profile in Ms. Baker's anus? It was Chris Melton's. So even if you take Mr. Melton's theory, even if you try to give him the benefit of the doubt, it doesn't match the science. And you actually heard Elizabeth Bigham say that. We have to explain your DNA. It doesn't make sense. The issue is Ms. Bigham went to a lab way out in California, You heard the young lady come in, Ms. Lacone. She was very honest. She said, well, I've never been asked to testify about this. This is a presumptive test. Both of these tests are presumptive tests. This is her first time coming into court. Based on what she said, she has not been called in court to testify about this science at no other time. But what Ms. Bigham does, when Mr. Melton wouldn't change his timeline, she changed it for him. And this is the significance of the DNA in the mouth. If you'll go to the paper before it. I don't know if I wrote this down, but let's see. This is the significance of the DNA in the mouth. So what Ms. Hinkle told us is that DNA in the mouth at longest lasts 24 hours. At longest. So when Ms. Bigham was meeting with Chris Melton saying, hey, we need to explain this because we need to put it on bad guy, we need to explain it because we need to go after the one we want, she knew when Chris Melton was saying, hey, I didn't see her the day before, hey, I didn't see her 2 days prior, hey, I didn't see her that week, that was a problem for their theory. It was a big problem. Because she wants Mr. Faust, whose DNA was at one time was only in the mouth. But she has a problem because Mr. Melton's DNA is in the mouth at that time and the anus. So she doesn't go to a lab in Georgia, Tennessee, Alabama, North Carolina, South Carolina. We're on the East Coast. And we don't know how many labs she went to. We don't know how many times she tried to get this stuff tested and tried to get the opinion she wanted. Maybe she was expert shopping. That evidence didn't come in. We don't know. But we do know they flew someone all the way from California on taxpayer dollars to testify about these tests where this young lady says it's presumptive. This is a presumptive test. This is the evidence they brought you. And the reason they brought you that evidence is because they had to take Chris Melton out of the mouth. But they forgot about the anus. They forgot about the anus. In fact, the state didn't even ask about the anus. If you notice, when they presented their case, they just said mouth and vagina. Is that searching for the truth? The elected district attorney came up here and said, our job is to find the truth. I've given you good and bad facts on our side. Is that searching for the truth? Where you only ask questions in the same manner that Elizabeth Bigham asked questions, whereas to put everything on Mr. Faust. The science does not support that Mr. Faust killed Ms. Baker. The science, the timeline supports Chris Melton. He's continuously lied. Even Elizabeth Bigham had to admit, yeah, I told him it wasn't consistent with what he said 23 years ago, or for the last 23 years. When have you ever in your life, whether it's on television or any experience you've ever had, known law enforcement to tell someone, look, it's not consistent with what you've been telling us, but let me offer a suggestion of what you should say. You've never heard of that. You've never heard of that. If you weren't in this courtroom, you wouldn't believe it. If somebody told you outside that, hey, I heard about this case, you know, the lead detective is telling the individual to lie so they could put it on somebody else, you'll say, no way. This guy's nuts. He doesn't know what he's talking about because it sounds so unbelievable. But what doesn't lie is the science and the physical evidence. You heard their expert, not my expert, their expert talk to you about the timelines. I also want to talk about the anus as well. How is it possible that Mr. Faust is charged with aggravated sodomy? He doesn't leave his DNA, but he leaves Chris Melton's DNA. How does that make sense? Mr. Faust is charged with aggravated sodomy for anally sexually assaulting Miss Baker, but somehow, some way, he doesn't leave his DNA. He leaves Chris Melton's DNA. That was supposed to be gone because, according to Chris Melton, he hadn't seen her since Sunday. That's the question that you all, as jurors, have to answer. Let's talk about Mr. Melton's actions, okay? Mr. Melton came in here, he testified, you know, we had this relationship, we were close, I loved her, and he even came to you all and started trying to cry. He couldn't get the tears out, but he wanted to get you all emotionally riled up. And I told you all, be careful about the emotions in this case because they do want you to get emotionally riled up. However, when I started questioning him, what did he tell us? Yeah, we already went over these questions. Mr. Melton got on this stand, took an oath, gave you a performance, something that he had already started doing with the state before he came in this courtroom.
Hang on a second, Mr. Cruz. Let's wait. Whoever phone that is, that person is going to need to leave the courtroom. Ms. Cruz, just hang on a second, sir, if you would, please.
Does it pause my time?
Your time has stopped. Don't worry. Don't worry. I got you. All right. You may continue.
But he gave you a performance. And I'm sure before cross-examination started, you probably said, oh, my God, this terrible guy, this poor guy. He's so hurt by this. He's finally had opportunity to tell his story until I had opportunity to start asking him questions. And I appreciate him admitting that he met with the state. I appreciate him admitting that he went through these questions with the state. But you have to judge his credibility on the witness stand. Now, let's talk about his actions. We don't even have to talk about his actions in court, because this is 25 years later. Let's talk about his actions the weekend of Ms. Baker's death. So Friday, he goes to the police department. They didn't tell him to come. He voluntarily goes. The state wants to paint that as, oh, he's such a good guy. We didn't have to call him. He just came up here because he just wanted to be a good person. You lose the love of your life. Whose first thought is to run to the police department in a whole nother city? Not to comfort the family, not to call Mrs. Virginia Baker and say, oh, my God, what's going on? His job or his decision is, let me go to the police department. And then Saturday, what did Mr. Bill Teeter tell us? And again, this is evidence. Bill Teeter says he comes to pick up his truck. If I lost somebody when I was dating my wife 2-3 years and something like this happened, this tragic, I'm not thinking about a truck. I'm not going to pick up a car. I could care less about a car. The family wasn't picking up cars, I'm sure. They were trying to put their life back together and figure out what was going on with this shop. But Chris Melton, he's picking up cars. Sunday, well, we don't even have to go to Sunday. Let's go to Monday. Because police tried to emphasize over and over and over and over and over again. He didn't have a lawyer. He didn't have a lawyer. He didn't have a lawyer. What did, I believe her name was Miss Christy. Her old name was Christy Search. I cannot remember her new name. She has a new last name, though. But she worked at the bank. Monday, he's at the bank requesting a loan. That's evidence in this case. Monday, she dies Friday. Monday, he's at the bank requesting a loan. What would you need a loan for on a Monday? Probably legal fees, right? You call a lawyer. Hey, police are questioning me about this death of my girlfriend. What's your fee going to be? I don't know. We don't know what he went to the bank for, but that's something you need to consider. Chris Melton went to the bank on a Monday to get a loan. What does he do within a week of Ms. Baker's death? On Thursday, he's at Mrs. Ashley P.V. Hall's house. She testifies to that. On Friday, he goes on 2 dates. Miss Ashley P.V. Hall told us on one of the dates, and she tried to explain it away, well, he's just a flirty guy. He just has a flirty personality. But he's flirting with the girl and he's rubbing her back. Your girlfriend just brutally died a week earlier. Chris, and I misstate things. I'm human. I am not perfect. I believe your notes, trust your notes. You're the jury. You decide the facts. I believe Chris even admitted to calling Ms. Hufford past 10 p.m. And I believe he said that everybody was hurting, if I remember correctly. And that was the reason he was reaching out to her. But actually, if your girlfriend dies a week prior, why are you calling other women at 10 o'clock at night within a week of her death saying, well, you know, if you're out in the town, give me a call? Chris's actions support that he was angry with Ms. Baker after her death. Her death supports Chris Melton was angry with Ms. Baker. He told us she didn't engage in anal sex. What other way could you humiliate a person? If that's something she doesn't do, you do it anyway. He's living his life. He's not hurt. He's going on dates. She has a candlelight visual. He skips it. He didn't love Miss Baker. He hated Miss Baker. We don't know why. The evidence didn't come in. But he knows Miss Baker has a candlelight visual. He's this great, dedicated boyfriend. He's just the perfect guy, just the nice guy. But she has this candlelight visual, and what Mr. Melton decides to do is, you know what, it's a country concert in Atlanta. Let me go see, give me a country guy. Who? Let's go see Garth Brooks. My girlfriend just died. Let's do a triple date to see Garth Brooks. And, you know, I'm going to blame it on her pretty much saying, you know, Chris, you don't need to be there. And I think somebody even came in here and tried to explain, well, you know, it was people they worked with. Chris had no need to be there. It is your significant other. Pay your respects if you care. He didn't care. He hated Miss Baker. And the manner of her death supports the exact same thing. You don't have a stranger breaking your house. A stranger, never been there before, just picked your house out of any house in the neighborhood, breaking your house, and kill in this type of manner. This is a overkill. This is a overkill. This isn't a random stranger killing. Somebody wants to steal your car, they shoot you in the head, they take the car. They don't shoot you and keep shooting you and keep shooting you and keep shooting you and keep shooting you. Nothing was stolen out of the house but a laptop. What does a laptop signify? It's personal. It's information on the laptop. This isn't she had diamond earrings in her ear. She had jury in her room. Roommates, jury in their room, money in the room. Nothing's taken. The person that went into Miss Baker's house was either led into Miss Baker's house or they had a key. Now, I asked Elizabeth Bigham about the keys. I said, hey, do you have Miss Baker's keys? What did she say? Yeah, I think so, but I don't know where they are. Or we may have them or they may be downstairs. I asked about the lock. Exact same answer. Now, the significance of those keys is twofold. One was Miss Baker's house key on the key. And I asked Mr. Melton, did you see Miss Baker enter her house? Because Mr. Melton would know what her house key looks like. A stranger wouldn't. A stranger wouldn't break into a house. Course indulgence. A stranger wouldn't break into a house, take the keys, and say, let me see if this one fits. Nope. Let me try this one. Nope. Oh, this one works. And then run off. That's not something a stranger does. But a person that knows what your keys look like, or who has a key, they know, okay, I can get in and out quick. A stranger doesn't. Stay around and clean up your house. And Dr. Valerie Lowe said it best. She said, it's like somebody knew we weren't going to be at home. How would a stranger just, out of 6 people possibly being in the home, how would a stranger just pick the right time and then have the nerve to stay there and clean the place up? That's not a stranger. That's somebody that knew Miss Baker. That's somebody that was angry with Miss Baker. Miss Baker didn't have a towel near her. She didn't have clothes near her. This was somebody she was comfortable with. And again, whose DNA was present? According to the state, Mr. Melton's DNA is in her vagina and her anus. But for the last 23 years, before Elizabeth Bigham got involved, his DNA was in her mouth and her anus. Whatever you think right, or whatever you think is right, you have to decide. You're the judges of the facts in this case. Now, you know that Chris Melton is a liar. It's been, Ms. Bigham said it. You heard the recording. You heard me ask her questions about the statement she made to him. This is inconsistent with what you said over the past 23 years, and that interview was in 2024. Mr. Faust is a truthful person. During his interview, he was asked about white women that he dated. He named the white woman that he dated, but he also said that he's had plenty of women in his day. And he told the investigators, I don't discriminate. I'm not a discriminatory person. Color doesn't matter to me. Dating, and you got to listen to the questions they ask because they want you to make assumptions. They want you to hear things one time and then start making assumptions. Dating signifies a commitment. They asked him about dating. Chris Melton claimed to date Ms. Baker. Mr. Faust didn't. They asked Mr. Faust, why was his DNA found in the house? Now, at this point, you know Mr. Faust's DNA was not found in Ms. Baker's house outside of it being in her body. They were asking him trick questions to see what he would say. And what did he say? What? My DNA? My DNA? I've never been in a house in Deer Park. I've never been over there. And again, the physical evidence does not lie. The science does not lie. The physical evidence tells you that Mr. Faust is telling the truth. Every single witness in this case that we talked about, what was found in the house, including the microscope, I think he was, I can't think of his name, but the expert who did the microscope with the hairs, he admitted, and I think it's bad science, but you have to decide, he admitted that there were no African American hairs found on, around, or anywhere near Ms. Baker's body. The physical evidence supports that Mr. Faust was telling the truth. The physical evidence supports that Chris Melton is a liar. After telling Mr. Faust that they had warrants for his arrest, they told him it was for murder. And mind you, let me not skip this point. They had already told him twice. So when you see him talking, he's already been told they have warrants for his arrest. He just isn't to the point where the warrants are for. But after telling him that they had warrants for his arrest for murder and aggravated sodomy, something significant happened, and the state doesn't want you to think about this. Just imagine you're at Walmart, or you're just out and about living your lives. Police come and pick you up. They're talking to you, and they say, you know what? We have warrants for your arrest. We already have the warrants. There's no getting out of it. For murder and aggravated sodomy. Something significant happens, and police are aware of this. You panic because you're scrambling, trying to figure out, oh my goodness, what the heck is going on? But they tell him this, and then they ask him, and it's very important that you listen to what they say, because you have to remember, Elizabeth Bigham is biased. She's already told Chris Melton, before she's met with Mr. Faust, we have to put it on this guy. You have to keep all this stuff into context. The interview with Chris Melton happened, I believe, on May 5th. I believe May 5th or 6th came in on the testimony. May 9th was Mr. Faust's interview. So she's already told Chris Melton, we're trying to get this guy. We have to go after this guy. So it's very important that you listen to the language of the questions that are asked. She asked Mr. Faust if he knew a girl, and this is a paraphrase, from a cold case from 2001. They didn't show Mr. Faust a photo. They have him freaking out. It's a murder warrant, the most serious charge in the state of Georgia. They don't show him a photo. They don't even give him the decency of telling Mr. Faust the young lady's name. So when he says, they say, do you remember him? He says, I seen a paper. I believe he says, I seen a paper when it first happened. And we have a photo we admitted into evidence. But I'll show you the media shot of Ms. Baker. Now, mind you, this is 24, 23 years before his interview. So it's been a while since he's seen this, as he said in an interview. But this is the media shot of Ms. Baker. We introduced a photograph, and Mr. Melton testified to it. Yeah, this is how Ms. Baker looked on a day-to-day. But they don't give Mr. Faust the decency because they don't care. They want him to say something so bad that's inconsistent so they could come before you and say, look what he said, look what he said, look what he said. But no, you need to look at what they did. Because it could happen to anybody in this courtroom. Look at what they did. And as soon as he said, man, I don't know that girl, all right, we got him. And now, let me make this clear. They already had the warrants. So I don't want you to think for a minute that they were giving him a chance to explain anything. The warrants were secured before they arrested Mr. Faust. But they could have just showed him this photo. Mr. Faust, do you know this young lady? Have you ever seen this young lady in your life? They didn't even do that. They didn't give him the decency, but they didn't want him to say he knew her. And Mr. Faust could have lied. He could have said, oh, yeah, the girl you're talking about from Deer Park, yeah, we talked, we dated. He didn't do any of that. He didn't do any of that. They never gave him an opportunity to understand who they were referring to, but now they want to use the evidence against him. You want to perform a shock and awe type of presentation on somebody, arrest them, tell them they're charged with murder and aggravated sodomy, and then have a gotcha moment. They didn't give Mr. Faust the chances or the grace that they gave Chris Melton. Elizabeth Bigham testified that Chris Melton said 7 times that he last saw Ms. Baker 10 days prior to her death. We went through it together. 1, 2, this is the 3rd time, this is the 4th time, this is the 5th time. 7 times Chris Melton said 10 days. But she comes in here to defend the 5 days because it fits the narrative. What you witness in this courtroom is a tragedy. It's heartbreaking. It's terrifying because this could happen to anybody. I have one. So in this little discussion that we just had, I've given you many reasons to doubt. We probably just discussed about 15 to 20 reasons to doubt the state case. You agree with one, you're done. If you agree with one reason to doubt, you're done. That is a truthful verdict. You must follow the law because that's what you took an oath to do. The second best way to explain guilt beyond a reasonable doubt is you compare it to making the most important decision of your life. And I hope that no one ever has this situation, but I'm sure you're all aware, or you may not be aware, so I won't mention it, but just imagine you have somebody in the hospital, somebody you love, somebody you care about, and they're on life support. And you're the person in the hospital waiting room, and the doctor comes to you, and the doctor says, pull the plug. If you could look at that doctor and say, doctor, go ahead and pull the plug. You've answered all of my questions. I believe, or I know Chris Melton's alibi was confirmed. I know that because I trust Chris Melton, just like law enforcement trusted Mr. Melton, or Chris Melton, excuse me. They said it did not have to be confirmed, so doctor, I believe the exact same thing. I'm going to ignore that the FBI told ACCPD, and that was from that testimony came in through Mr. What was the gentleman's name? The report. I cannot think of the gentleman's name. That testimony came in through Griffith. I asked Griffith about the FBI asking him to search Mr. Melton's hard drive. And what did Mr. Griffith tell us? Despite FBI saying, hey, this guy hasn't been ruled out, he's saying, well, you know what, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I know best. His alibi is confirmed. Don't worry about it. The FBI didn't clear him. But you may say, doctor, I trust Mr. Griffith. I trust what he said. Although scientifically his DNA says that, although science says that his DNA should not be present 5 days in Miss Baker's anus, I'm going to ignore that. I believe the state's strange theory, doctor. I believe what they said. I don't know how, but somehow it drained from Sunday to Friday, and it stayed there, doctor. And I also believe that Miss Baker and Chris Melton were in a loving, caring relationship, and he was destroyed by the fact that she passed away. I I believe that doctor, so pull that plug. I'm satisfied. My mind is set. And when your mind is satisfied, and you hear the judge talk about reasonable doubt and the mind being satisfied, if your mind is satisfied, you have enough information. And what that means is your mind is not wavering. Well, maybe it did happen this way, maybe it didn't happen this way. When your mind is satisfied, it says you have all the information that you need to make a decision. It is not unsettled. And at that point, you know what to do. We've all had those type of decisions. Do I want a McMuffin in the morning? Do I want hash browns? You know what? I'm going to go with the McMuffin. My mind is not wavering. It is settled. When your mind is satisfied beyond a reasonable doubt, you don't have any reason to doubt. And remember what we talked about. It's one reason. When your mind is satisfied beyond a reasonable doubt, you have no reason to doubt. You have to ignore Ms. Baker's roommates. And although on the state's examination, and I don't know the relationship they have with Mr. Melton now. I know it's a tough situation to come in this courtroom and talk about it. But they said, hey, they admitted when they were talking to police outside of this courtroom that Tara's relationship with, Ms. Baker's relationship with Chris, and I believe it was and I'll start with Ms. Valerie Lowe. Ms. Valerie Lowe told us that Tara herself said that her relationship with Chris was a distraction. And the day Ms. Baker was killed, like I stated, Ms. Lowe said it was almost like someone knew we weren't going to be home. Ms. Ashley P.V. Hall told us something inconsistent with what Chris Melton said. She had to admit when we were asking her questions that before Ms. Baker died, watching Ms. Baker's relationship with Chris Melton was just like watching the normal ending of a relationship. But you heard every law enforcement witness 24 years later, oh, it was a great relationship, it was a great relationship, it was a great relationship. But when we asked, who did you confirm that with? Oh, Chris. Mr. Faust didn't get that benefit. You'd also have to ignore that Chris failed to tell the police that him and Tara had a fight the week before her death. Right? And he came in here and he said, oh, well, yeah, it was a fight about a porno I had. It was an orange tape. He gave you this elaborate story about this porn to say we had a fight about a porn. Right? But I want you to consider that. I think that's a significant fact considering what occurred to Ms. Baker when she passed away. Now, I don't trust Chris Melton. I think everything he says is not to be trusted, but you may. Ms. Baker was sexually assaulted in multiple ways. If Chris Melton is telling the truth, the last fight they had was over pornography. And it was serious enough to cause a rift in the relationship. Now, with the laptop piece, we don't know if Ms. Baker wrote Mr. Melton a letter, typed it up, so he needed to take the laptop. We don't know. That didn't come in. But that is something for you to consider. Their last fight, according to Chris, was over porn. Her death was sexual in nature. You would also have to ignore Chris's statement about punching this wall 30 times, I believe was his testimony. So Chris Melton's testimony was that he punched the wall 30 times, and that's what caused the injuries to his hands. But this is a question I have for you. When you look at Mr. Melton's hands, because he said it was concrete that he punched, where were the bruises on his hands outside of the scratches? Mr. Melton said it was concrete that was punched, But at what point did he seek medical attention? He didn't. Mr. Melton came in here and said, well, this is my story. I punched the concrete wall 30 times because I was so distraught. And law enforcement even came in to back up that story. But the question I have for you, if his hands weren't a big deal and you knew on Friday that he didn't have these injuries, why take the pictures? Why go to the house and check if you say Chris Melton didn't have these injuries? Their actions are inconsistent with their statements. But I'm going to tell you why, and you have to judge witness credibility. Law enforcement has allowed this community to live in fear for the last 25 years, maybe 23. They've allowed it. When people heard about this case or thought about this case, it was because of law enforcement failures. The questions that the family had, they ignored for 23 years. And I tell you, my position, you have to decide, you're the jury. They weren't here defending Chris Melton. They were here defending themselves. They were here to say, hey, all this stuff we missed, forget about it. Don't worry about that. Because we didn't actually miss anything. There were, Detective Ricketts, there were law enforcement officers coming in here. And I admire law enforcement. I think they are heroes. When I'm running out of a building, they are running in. They are heroes. But you also have to understand, we have Detective Ricketts coming in saying, Chris Melton's alibi is confirmed. And if you could show the alibi chart that we did with Detective Ricketts. Chris Melton's alibi is confirmed. But when I started going through, well, Detective, did you confirm this? Were you able to speak to Nash Plumbing? No. Testimony even came in that they couldn't find Nash Plumbing in information. Chris Melton couldn't provide them an address to Nash Plumbing. They couldn't find Nash Plumbing. He couldn't even give them a phone number to Nash Plumbing. That is evidence in this case. But instead of admitting for the sake of justice, for the sake of Miss Baker and her memory that, hey, we may have made some mistakes, and if these mistakes get us closer to getting the right person in that chair, as opposed to the wrong person, we'll admit it. Because that's the right thing to do. Instead, they come in here and they double down on inconsistencies that don't make sense. Ricketts tells us Nash Plumbing for Chris, unconfirmed. Nash Plumbing for Josh, unconfirmed. Chris says he goes to the bank. Josh says he went to Chick-fil-A, unconfirmed. As you know, the bank is at 9:08 a.m. And I told you all, the most important time is before 9 a.m. for Chris Melton. The most important time is before 9 a.m. because at this point, Ms. Baker is gone. Truck Customs, he says 9:30 or earlier, and we know from Bill Teeter, it was after 9:30, it was 10, I believe Mr. Teeter said around 10. Grayson, Georgia, unconfirmed. But look at Josh, and this is from Ricketts. The same person who sat in here and said, it's nothing, these inconsistencies are nothing. Josh says they're in Grayson at 8 a.m. Chris would have to be in Grayson after 9:30 a.m. Chris says they've known each other for 1 month. Josh says they've known each other for a year. And when I asked him about it, he said, well, and this is Detective Ricketts, well, the way I just took it that he meant a year. Even on small mistakes, we all have children, grandchildren, siblings, parents. We're human. Nobody's perfect. But when you have a person or organization or entity trying to get you to believe that they made no mistakes when the mistakes are apparent, you have to judge their credibility. You have to take that into account when you're determining what your verdict is going to be, if you could trust this person or not trust this person. Now, I don't know if you caught this, but it blew my mind when I heard it. And I didn't ask him about it again because I didn't want him to try to change his answer. Chris Melton, on this stand during direct examination, they asked him, why didn't you want to go into the house when they asked you to identify the body? And we all, the entire team, we jotted this down in court. Chris Melton stated he didn't want to go into Miss Baker's apartment because he did not want to see the devastation he had caused. I don't know if you all caught that, but I absolutely caught it. Chris Melton came in here and pretty much confessed to what he did. But you're the jurors, you heard the testimony, you have to decide. You would also, to pull that plug, you would also have to ignore what Karen Williams told us. Now, Karen Williams did a sketch. This is a sketch. And I tell you, based on this trial, I don't trust anything in this case, but this is a sketch. And the questions I went over with Ms. Williams, formerly Carol Bryant, how much did the person weigh? We got her to admit that he had a full face. She said that he was not thin. He had a full face, probably around 220. We got her to admit, I asked her, he had a heavy-looking face. We got her to admit, yeah, he had a heavy-looking face. We asked her about the weight, again, 220, and she stated that he was big bone, kind of husky. But this is the person they give you. Now, I don't know, and I think we went over the mustache with her. They didn't even have the right type of facial hair on the person. But to me, what I believe, and you're the jury, you have to decide, they have made so many mistakes in this case, I wouldn't be shocked if they started changing evidence, just to be completely honest with you. And I hate to even say that. But when you introduce hair evidence in this case, you deceive the jury and say, hey, in these bags, and I said, can we open these? No, we're not going to open them. I asked, can we open this to make sure the evidence is what the evidence is? They brought you empty bags of evidence to get you to believe something that was not true. And then when we got the bags open, all of a sudden they find all the hairs and say, oh, this is with the GBI, and with these broken, I don't even know what to call them, but these broken slides or screens or whatever they may be. But also, and I'm going to go back to this, I'm going to go to this a lot. Not only do they present you empty evidence, they present junk science. Science that has never been presented in a court before to protect either themselves, which I think is more so protecting themselves, and to protect Chris Melton. Now, when we talk about the sketches, remember what everybody said, and this was consistent, because I asked the same question for every sketch witness. The person is walking. The person isn't trying to hide themselves. The person's just minding their business. And I also asked, is there a Walmart? Some people said, I don't know. But we did have Ms. Riker say, yeah, I assumed the person was going to Walmart. And if you think about the direction everybody was walking, if this is the... Every single person that saw somebody said they were walking down this way. Nobody ever said, oh, well, I saw a person walking up towards Ms. Baker's house. They were all walking this way. And during the evidence, what is this way? The Walmart. You will have that photo with you in evidence. On the other side, down here, past this subdivision, it's the Walmart. But what they did was, okay, let's get all these sketches of these people. They're walking. They aren't doing anything suspicious. Something that's important, they mentioned a laptop being stolen. That came in during the case. Not one of these sketch individuals said, oh, they were carrying a laptop. They were carrying anything. They were acting suspicious. It was just, they were walking. And the state is going to come to you and say, hey, we can't prove that Mr. Faust broke into her house, but we want you to pick one of the people that we have these sketches of and just say it was Mr. Faust. And we want you to assume, we want you to speculate. We want you to say that Mr. Faust is the person in the house. And I'll tell you this. If there's no evidence in the house of Mr. Faust's presence, this is something simple you can remember. No house, no Faust. If there's no evidence of Mr. Faust in the house, no house, no Faust. Tell them to present the evidence. If you can't present the evidence that Mr. Faust was in the house, we have to vote not guilty. We have to. We have to. You're saying this crime happened in the house. You charged him with burglary. We have to. That's the simplest way to remember it. So when they make up, hey, the guy was walking and he disappeared, so that meant he broke into Ms. Baker's house, you say no house, no Faust. Show me the hairs. Show me the blood. Show me the skin. Show me the DNA in her house, outside of her body, on her skin. Show me something. We presented a photo of Mr. Faust. He does have an afro. And they say, well, the hair in her hands, you know, we just want to show you that it's not Mr. Melton's hair. That's all we want to show you. It's not Mr. Melton's hair. It was Caucasian hair. Now, I don't understand, and you're the jury, you have to decide. How would Ms. Baker get a handful of her own hair? How is that possible? Your hand is outward away from your body, but it's your own hair? But in this case, it doesn't matter, because what you're here to decide is if the state presented enough evidence that Mr. Faust is responsible for Ms. Baker's death. And they haven't. But what they are going to argue, they're going to say, hey, it was this one person walking down the street, and he disappeared, so we want you to say this was the person that committed this crime. And they harp on, oh, he stayed 585 feet away from her house. He stayed 585 feet away from her house. Well, that means there's an issue with the investigation, because if the person that you say killed Ms. Baker stayed that close, why didn't nobody go to the house and speak to him? He did say his grandmother stayed there. You heard the recording. It's my stepmother's house. But now, 24 years later, 25 years later, they want to say, oh, that's evidence of guilt. And I ask you, listen to the recordings. Listen to the pieces played in the recordings. Mr. Faust says multiple times, yeah, I go over there to check on my stepmother. I'll go over there to visit my stepmother. And I don't know about all of you, but we all have permanent addresses. Mr. Faust said he stayed in that house for 40 years, but he also said, yeah, I have different women I stay with here or there. My permanent address, if somebody asks me how long I stayed at my permanent address, even if I'm not physically staying there, I am going to say 30 years. I've been at this address for 30 years. Even if I don't physically stay there, because that's my permanent address. That's where I may want to send taxes. That's if I get a ticket, I may want to send a ticket there. This is my permanent address. The state wants you to take his permanent address and say, well, this is his address. He said he stayed there. So that means he committed this crime. So why not move? If you've caused this much destruction in this community, why not move? If Mr. Faust committed this crime, how would he know that no one saw him? Why even tell police that you stayed there? But you know who did move out of Athens and who admitted they moved out of Athens? Chris Melton. He got the heck out of town. Never to come back. And where did Mr. Melton say he stayed when Ms. Baker died? His parents' home. Where does he currently stay? Ms. Baker's home. Excuse me, not Ms. Baker. I'm sorry. His parents' home. Where does he currently stay? Still in his parents' home. And I want to show you something. And this is the reason Mr. Melton stated that he stayed on the second floor. He is a liar. Because Josh McCurdy came in and said he stayed in the basement. But I'm going to show you why he lied. And this is a ball that was dropped by law enforcement. The reason Mr. Melton lied is because the basement to his house has its own door. So he wanted to separate himself from that door, because obviously I had to show him the pictures first. He didn't want you to know that he had an entrance and an exit he could go in that his parents would know nothing about. This is the door right here. Crime of opportunity. Mr. Melton had the opportunity. Think about what Mr. Teeter told us with him dropping his truck off. He dropped his truck off and went to see the police in Josh's truck. Why would he do that? Maybe he didn't want law enforcement to search it. But you all have to decide. But if you say, I'm going to ignore all of that, I believe Mr. Faust was the person walking in orange in the neighborhood. I know the state can't present any evidence that he was in the house, but I just believe it was Mr. Faust. That is my belief. I think it was Mr. Faust. You pull that plug because your mind is settled, is satisfied, and it is not wavering. And you then find Mr. Faust guilty because your mind is satisfied beyond a reasonable doubt. But if you want to say to that doctor, hold on, doctor. Hold on 1 second. If Mr. Faust committed this crime, why would Elizabeth Bigham need to tell Chris Melton we need to explain your DNA? I have questions about that, doctor. That doesn't make sense. Doc, you're telling me to pull the plug, but Miss Baker was sexually assaulted anally But Chris Melton's DNA is the only DNA present? I don't know, doctor. Also, Chris Melton's hair was found on the murder weapon. And let me clear this up for you, because I think there was a lot of confusion with that. Can you get the picture of Miss Baker and the charger block next to her head? It'll be in the state's exhibit. And I'll show you that picture. But I'll describe it to you. When you see Miss Baker's body as it was found in the home, you're going to see a charger block next to her head. It was connected to the cord used to strangle her. When they tested this cord for hairs, or they tried to find hairs, on this charger block next to her head, I'm going to tell you this. Don't look at the sketch. The sketch has it way far away from her head. Look at the picture. It's right next to her head. You're going to hear that Chris Melton's hair is on the murder weapon. Not Mr. Faust's, Chris Melton's. There was a pubic hair found on Miss Baker's butt. Now, the state brought in this microscopic expert to say, oh, it's Ashley P.V. Hall's hair, and anything is possible, right? But we went with Miss Ashley P.V. Hall. We said, do you have your own bathroom? Or did you have your own bathroom? She said, yes. Did you have your own shower, tub? Yes. Did you have your own toilet? Yes. The mitochondria DNA test, the only DNA test conducted that referred to Chris Melton, determined that he could not be excluded as a contributor of the hair. Miss P.V. Hall could not also be excluded. I want to make that clear. But what law enforcement didn't do, because it didn't fit the narrative of Mr. Faust committing this crime, when they tell you we have new DNA technology, when Mr. Melton's DNA popped up in her body, they didn't retest that hair because it didn't fit their narrative. So potentially, not only is Mr. Melton's DNA in Miss Baker's anus, his hair was on her butt. But they never followed up when the mitochondria DNA test said, we can't exclude him as a contributor. But again, you ask the doctor, Doc, you're telling me that a complete stranger broke into Miss Baker's home without any signs of forced entry, spent time beating her, strangling her, stabbing her, sexually assaulting her, and then he takes the time to clean up the house, setting it on fire and only taking a personal item such as a laptop, despite money, jewelry, diamonds being in the house? And then this stranger was able to somehow lock the back and front door and get away unseen. Is that what you're telling me, Doc? I have questions. And I ask you this, why would Mr. Faust say he stayed at 350 Cooper Road? That's something you need to consider when they say, hey, the fact that he stayed so close is evidence of guilt. But again, how does where he stayed, or his stepmother's home, or the home he visited, because that evidence is an evidence. You can listen to the recording, listen to what he said. How does evidence that he stayed close to Miss Baker's home prove that he murdered her? Because that's the jump the state wants you to make. They want you to hear, oh, he stayed close and his DNA was in there, so that means he murdered her, he raped her. He did these horrific acts. We can't prove he's in the house, and remember, no house, no Faust. We cannot prove he's in the house. But we want you to look at all this other stuff. Look at it, look how close he is. They went out and got drone footage, just wasting time. Drone footage to show you how close the houses were. So what? So what? Ask them, how does that prove your case? The burden is on you. Give us the evidence. We want to protect this community, but we also want to avoid injustices. If you want us to convict, give us the evidence. The other one with the block next to her hip. That isn't evidence of a crime. That's evidence of proximity, but that isn't evidence of a crime. They've charged Mr. Faust with some crime so disgusting. When you all heard him, you were like, oh my God. Certain people say they had physical reactions. But the best evidence you come with is the fact that he stayed close, and you go spend all this money doing drone footage. Ms. Bigham, I believe, you're the jury, you will remember the testimony better than I. I believe she said it was like $5 million they had for this case, or a $5 million budget or something like that, or a Baker-Coleman Act bill that provided a certain amount of money. I don't know, I could be mistaken. Okay, I probably am mistaken, so I'm gonna leave that one alone. But if you say that Mr. Faust being close to the home is a problem. In 2001, why nobody went to the home to speak with anyone? They presented no records, no evidence of who they spoke with, where they went. That's their job. The judge is going to tell you Mr. Faust doesn't have to present any evidence. If we needed to, we're prepared to. But Mr. Faust didn't have to present that. They were required to, and they didn't. You say, Doctor, I still have questions. Chris Melton's hands, how did they look like that? This is a tough picture, but it's part of the evidence in this case. This is where Chris Melton's hair was found. It was found on this object right here. This is Miss Baker's head. So when we say Mr. Melton's hair was found on a murder weapon, the cord used to strangle, this cord here is wrapped around Miss Baker's neck. So when we say his hair was found on a murder weapon, it literally was found on the murder weapon, next to her head. And again, I'm going to emphasize this for deliberations. Don't look at the sketch, because the sketch, you have the photos. You don't have to look at a sketch of how the scene looked. You have the photos yourself. Justin. Also, Detective Ricketts stated that he fingerprinted Chris Melton. I'm sure you remember that testimony. He said, the reason I know there were no injuries on Mr. Melton's hands is because I fingerprinted Chris Melton. So there's two questions you have to ask. If you were not arresting Chris Melton, why were you fingerprinting Chris Melton? That's one. The second question, and maybe it's in evidence. I don't recall seeing it, but maybe it's in evidence. Ask them for the fingerprint card. Ask them for the fingerprint card. They said they did it. We don't just take a person's word for it, especially when you have a history of being dishonest. Show us the fingerprint card. So what I anticipate you should have in evidence is a fingerprint card taken from January 19th, 2001. Make sure you look at the dates, okay? So if it says January 23rd or January 22nd, that isn't what Detective Ricketts said on the stand. There should be a fingerprint card for January 19th, 2001 with Mr. Melton's fingerprints in it. You can open all of this stuff if you want to. You're the jury. You're the finders of fact. So Detective Ricketts said it. Ask for the evidence. But when the doctor says pull that plug, you say, Doctor, one of my gravest concerns is that law enforcement seemed just much more so focused not on justice for Ms. Baker, not on resolving this, answering these questions for the Baker family. They seem more focused on protecting themselves. And maybe Chris Melton. Doctor, I'm not sure. Doc, you're asking me to pull the plug, but where was Chris Melton before 9 a.m.? All these witnesses came in. Every law enforcement officer, they fought me. They fought me when it came to confirming Chris's alibi. It was confirmed. It was confirmed. It was confirmed. All right, well, let's break it down piece by piece. Did you confirm this? No, but it was still confirmed. Okay. Talk to me about Nash Plumbing. Did you get documents? No, but it was still confirmed. All right. Josh McCourty, did you get any proof that they ever worked together? No, but it was still confirmed. And then they'll try to jump to the bank. And the reason I emphasize the bank is because the bank is irrelevant. The bank is at 9:08. Ms. Baker was killed in the morning time. According to the state, it was somebody walking around at 8 a.m., 8:30. According to the state. 9 a.m. is irrelevant. So don't let the state come up here and tell you, oh, his alibi was confirmed. You ask them, well, where's the evidence related to Nash Plumbing? They didn't call one witness from Nash Plumbing. And we told them for, I believe, months, Mr. Faust didn't commit this crime. Weeks before this trial, we told the state because we wanted them to disprove it. Chris Melton killed Tara Baker. And that was with the hope that they'll look at their case and say, oh, maybe we got a problem. But instead, what they do, they meet with all their witnesses and they prep them. And they say, you know what? Chris Melton didn't do anything. You don't give any answers that the defense attorney wants. We're going to prep you. We're going to talk to you about it. Anything they say that Chris Melton did, you say the opposite. They knew this stuff. This isn't new. Everything you heard, they knew. This is their evidence. I didn't make any of this evidence. The only evidence that I brought to you is the picture of Chris Melton's house because they didn't want you to know that. But everything else you've seen and you've heard in this case, I didn't go find it on my own. they knew this, and they chose to ignore it to focus on him. And I'll tell you this, way to evidence, Chris Melton, Edrick Faust. The evidence related to Chris Melton substantially outweighs the evidence related to Edrick Faust. Could you imagine me in this courtroom trying to defend the hands that Mr. Melton had? And my argument as well, 2 days after her death, he was punching a wall. You all would look at me and say, this guy's crazy. What is he in here talking about? Or if I was trying to defend Mr. Melton and I said, well, my client, he went to pick up his truck on Saturday, he went to get a bank loan on Monday, and then he went out on 2 dates within a week of her death. You would say, this guy's, what is he talking about? Why are we here? Think about the evidence you heard about Chris Melton. Think about how he was on the stand. You had a killer in here talking to you that has gotten away for 23 years. He didn't shed one tear. I showed him a picture of Miss Baker. He didn't shed one tear. Think about that. Edrick Faust did not harm Miss Baker. But you don't have to take my word for it. You can look at the evidence. You can look at the evidence. So you say, doctor, the state has to explain how Mr. Faust's DNA alone means rape. How does his proximity, if you say he stayed there, how does his proximity mean murder, rape, arson, aggravated sodomy, 2 counts, 4 counts of felony murder, burglary? You need the evidence. So, doctor, you don't pull that plug. Hold on, my mind is wavering. It is not satisfied. It is not settled. I have questions. Doc, don't pull that plug. When Mr. Faust chose you all to decide his case, he gave you all awesome power. You may have noticed that each and every time the Honorable Judge Lott entered and exited this courtroom, we'd stand in her presence. And the reason we stand in the Honorable Judge Lott's presence is to show respect for her awesome power as the giver of laws in this courtroom. You may have also noticed each and every time you, ladies and gentlemen, entered and exited this courtroom, we stand in your presence. Because just like Judge Lott, you all are the judges of the facts in this case. In our standing, that is symbolic to show our respect to your power. The first thing you did as a body when you entered this courtroom, when you entered this jury box, you stood up, you raised your right hand, and you took an oath. And by that oath, each of you, you promised, you swore to decide this case based on 2 things. 1, the facts, only as they came out in this courtroom. And 2, the law as given to you by the Honorable Judge Lott. Because you need to understand the law and the facts, I would like to discuss them both with you at this time. Starting with the law. The first principle that I like to discuss with you is the Bill of Indictment. Okay? Don't be afraid of this document. This is a very important document. Embrace it and read it. Because in this document contains the charges that you will decide against Mr. Faust. During your deliberations, and this is very important, use this document because this will tell you what evidence you're looking for. The indictment was returned by the grand jury, and you've heard this term before, of Clark County. And what the grand jury is 16 to 23 people. They meet with the district attorney's office, and you've heard Agent Bigham's testimony, but they meet with a summary witness, okay? A summary witness is a witness that just comes in and tells the group about the case. I can't be there. Mr. Faust can't be there. He can't defend himself. He can't hear anything that you all heard. The judge isn't there. It's simply the district attorney's office and their witness. and they tell the room whatever they want to tell them, and they return an indictment. And the judge will tell you that this indictment is not evidence of guilt whatsoever, in any way whatsoever. And the reason why is because it is only a one-sided story. That's it. It's a one-sided story. That's how you get this indictment. Give you a short story. If anybody's ever dealt with a lawsuit in here, similar to a lawsuit, right? Let's say you're at home, you go to your neighbor's house, you say, neighbor, I want to build a fence on my property, okay? I am going to build a fence 5 feet inside of my property line because I don't want to encroach on your property, all right? Do you have any problems with that? Do you want to go get your own surveyor? Do you want to have somebody come out and look at it? I don't want any problems with you, so I'm going to make sure I build it 5 inches inside of my property line. Your neighbor says, no, don't worry about it. You build your fence. One night, you're at home eating dinner with your family, and you receive a knock on the door. You go to the door, you open it, and it's the Clark County Sheriff's Office. Might be that gentleman over there. He's serving you with a summons and complaint. And he says, sir, ma'am, you're being sued by your neighbor for the fence you built on their property. And you say, what? That's absurd. I talked to my neighbor. They didn't want to discuss it. I built it 5 feet inside of my property line. He's going to tell you that's not for me. But what you all could do, which all of us could do, you could go, you could hire your own lawyer, you could pick a jury, and you could let the jury decide what occurred. Because what you didn't know, your neighbor, when he got his lawyer, they typed up a summons and complaint, and you got sued. It doesn't mean you did anything wrong. Doesn't mean your neighbor's right. Doesn't mean your neighbor's telling the truth. But that's the way a civil case gets started. The same thing with the bill of indictment. It's just the way a criminal case gets started. The next principle of law I'd like to discuss with you are the 12 counts in the indictment. The sole issue in this case, it may make deliberations very simple for you all. The sole issue, everything that is charged in this indictment we believe occurred. The sole issue where we are on opposite ends of the earth is whether or not Mr. Faust committed these crimes. That's the sole issue you have to decide. Has the state presented enough evidence that Mr. Faust committed these offenses? Malice murder. It's the first count in the indictment. And you're going to have these jury charges. The first element of malice murder, and this is the only question you have to answer in regards to malice murder, the first element is that the defendant, in this case Mr. Faust, caused the death of another person. That's the only question you have to answer in regards to malice murder. Did Mr. Faust, let me change that, did the state, because it's their burden, did the state present enough evidence to you to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Mr. Faust, and I hate to use this language, but murdered Miss Baker? I'll tell you they didn't, and we've discussed it. No house, no fouls. They didn't present any evidence placing Mr. Faust in the home. That's first and foremost. None. They admitted in opening statements they can't even tell you how he got into the home. Right? And I'm telling you what their argument is going to be. It's going to be choose anybody that was walking in the neighborhood. We want you to say that's Mr. Faust. That's what they're going to tell you. They're going to say, Jay Anderson saw a guy walking that fit Mr. Faust's description, and he disappeared when Mr. Anderson went away from the window. So that means this guy ran around the house and broke in the house. Ask them for evidence. The person that killed Miss Baker knew Miss Baker. That has always been our position. Look at the photos of the crime. The person that killed her knew her. They were angry. Why they were angry, we don't know. It didn't come in this case. But they were enraged. It was an overkill. Counts 2 through 5 are felony murder. They charged Mr. Faust with 4 counts of felony murder. To convict of felony murder, the state must prove, and again, it's only one issue that you have to decide with all these counts. that Mr. Faust is the individual that engaged in these acts. And they have to prove that beyond a reasonable doubt. We've addressed counts 1 through 5. Count 6, burglary. The state must prove that Mr. Faust, and again, it's every count, they have to prove Mr. Faust did this, that Mr. Faust entered the home. And we can stop there. We don't even have to go through every other element. They have to prove that Mr. Faust is the person that entered Ms. Baker's home. And the state has admitted that although, and I repeat this because it's so mind-blowing to me, that although they can't prove how Mr. Faust got in the home or that Mr. Faust was in the home, this gentleman is sitting over here. That has been shocking to me since day one. They can't prove, or matter of fact, we all know now that the science says Chris Melton is the only identifiable DNA profile in Ms. Baker's anus, but they have this gentleman sitting over here charged with aggravated sodomy. That's why juries protect the community. That's why we have juries. Because the first thing any totalitarian governmental system does, they get rid of the jury. They say we decide who's guilty or who's innocent. This right here, and a lot of you may not know what this is, okay? But this right here is the strongest symbol in any democratic society that uses jurors. And I could kick it, I could probably rip it off the ground. But the reason this is so powerful, and the reason you see this in every single courthouse, is because when they were putting the Constitution together, when they were founding this great country, this is in place to symbolize the separation between the people and the government. This is the strongest symbol, this partition, and that's why their table is closer, because they want to make it clear. This is a separation of the people from the government. Oral sodomy. The state must prove that Mr. Faust forcibly and against Ms. Baker's will, and they presented no evidence of that. And I think this is significant. And I may say this wrong, but I'm going to say it, so please forgive me. If I stumble over my words, please forgive me. Elizabeth Bingham was the person that decided who raped Ms. Baker and who didn't. She had two options. She had Chris Melton, she had Mr. Faust. She was the one that had to make the call. She was the lead investigator on this case. So it wasn't Ms. Baker saying, hey, this is who did it to me. Ms. Baker had Caucasian hair everywhere. She tried to leave him something. But Elizabeth Bingham is the person that made the call. And despite all the evidence in this case, and she told you that she reviewed her entire case, for everything in this case that I've seen, she's seen. Instead of saying, hey, you know what, let me follow the evidence, she sets a meeting with Chris Melton and tells Mr. Melton, look, this is what we need to do. She hasn't talked to Mr. Faust. She doesn't know Mr. Faust at this point. It's just, this is what we need to do. I'm going to go after this other guy. So when you think about these charges, I want you to think about them in the context of why we're here. There isn't a person saying that Mr. Faust did all these terrible things outside of the person who had to make the decision on who to pursue. And they chose Mr. Faust. So they have to present evidence supporting that Mr. Faust was engaged with Ms. Baker without consent. And the court is going to tell you that. You're going to hear it in jury instructions. They have to prove that any contact was without consent. And Mr. Faust can't answer that question for you. They snatch him up 24 years later. Chris Melton has been answering the question for 23 years, or 25 at this point. And his answers, lies, 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 lies. A person lied to me one time, I'm done with him forever. If somebody could take an oath before God and get on this witness stand before God and lie, is that somebody you could trust? He's shown police multiple times he's willing to lie. He said 7 times he saw her 10 days and switched it for him. And then he came here and said the same thing. Oh, I was mistaken on the 10 days. You know, Liz, he called her by her first name. He actually has a nickname for her. He calls her Liz. Liz reminded me that it was actually 5 days when I saw her. He's a liar. He's not truthful. Mr. Yalamachili told you the purpose of a case, any trial, is to find out the truth. You don't build a case to find the truth based on liars and lies. And this is what this case has been. This is very important for you to consider in deliberations. There is no evidence of sperm in this case. I want to make that very clear. You heard a GBI person come up. They talked about sperm for a little bit. We made our objection. And you notice that she never mentioned sperm again. But she also admitted when we were doing examinations that she didn't test it for sperm. In evidence, you will have a sperm test that says there is no spermatozoa. So when the state tells you this is a rape case, his DNA is in her mouth, his DNA is in her mouth, okay, how? How? This is a rape case, it's in her vagina, okay, there's no sperm. We don't know, it's 24 years later. But they have to prove that. And I want to make it 100% clear. If they say it's rape, they have to prove it is rape with evidence, not speculation, and I told you this during opening. Not with because we say so. It requires evidence. Count 8, rape, as I just mentioned, I want to make it clear. No assumptions, no stereotypes. You make your decision based on evidence. The state wants you to rely on assumptions. They want you to make leaps. Not inferences, they want you to make leaps. They want you to assume things. They want you to have stereotypes. Base it on the evidence. And when we chose you as jurors, when Mr. Faust chose you as jurors, we chose people that we felt followed procedure, respected the law, and were required evidence to be presented. Aggravated assault. Same thing. They have to prove that it's Mr. Faust. And finishing up, I thank you all for your patience. Just want to make sure I cover all bases. I believe I addressed the whole drainage theory. It is not possible. And don't take my word for it. Take Ms. Hinkle's word for it. It's not possible. 3 days is the max. Ms. Baker was killed on a Friday. Chris lied and said he saw her on Sunday. It was really 10 days, but we'll say 5 days to be nice. It's not possible. And they probably knew it. That's why they didn't ask Ms. Hinkle about anal, because they knew she would have said, well, it's only 3 days. The theory doesn't make sense. And again, they did ask her, and she said, well, for it to reset in the anus, it requires penetration. Drainage is not an option anymore. They told you in opening, that's how it got there. It's not an option anymore. The science says otherwise. Trust the science. You don't have to trust us. Trust the science. They brought in evidence that Ms. Baker showered daily. That's something that you need to keep in mind. Dr. Falzone, he was the medical examiner in this case. I just want to make it clear. He has made clear there was an anal sexual assault. State can't dance around that. He made it clear. The injuries were consistent with sexual assault to her anus. Count 11, arson in the first degree. Again, they have to prove that Mr. Faust committed that offense. Possession of a knife during the commission of the crime. Again, they have to prove Mr. Faust. That's the only question. Has the state presented enough evidence to you to say that this was Mr. Faust? Judge is going to give you instruction on credibility of witnesses. Remember who was honest in this case. John Newton, he was honest. Bill Teeter, he was honest. The physical evidence, it is honest. The science, it is honest. In all of those, and I'll say two, the physical evidence and the science supports Mr. Faust's innocence. The physical evidence and the science supports, not even the physical evidence and science, the physical evidence, the science, and his statements support Chris Melton's guilt. But I made this clear in opening. You're not here to decide whether or not Chris Melton committed this crime. So in deliberations, don't say, well, do we think Chris Melton did it, or do we think Mr. Faust did it? Your only focus is, does the evidence support beyond a reasonable doubt? If you say maybe Mr. Melton did it, maybe Mr. Faust did it, the vote is not guilty. We discussed that. Now I want to talk about something that I think is significant in this case, and I'm sure you're all aware of this because we talked about it in jury selection. And we also talked about it in opening. One of the biggest pieces, there is a bill that was passed in this a bill that was passed in this case, and Ms. Bigham talked about it. I told you in opening that it was the fame, the lights, being the superstar police officer that closed this case that led them to say, hey, this is somebody we could put as the face of Ms. Baker's death. But I want you to consider Mr. Faust was put on the news as the bad guy. This case, he hasn't been the bad guy once in this case. Right? The worst you've heard about Mr. Faust in this case is the indictment. They spent, and listen, I took to heart when people say, hey, we got stuff to do. We got to get out of here. We can't stay here 6 weeks. We can't stay here 8 weeks. We can't stay here 4 weeks. They spent 7 days defending Chris Melton. Think about how long you've been here. They spent 7 days on Chris Melton and 2 days on Mr. Faust, maybe 3. I'll tell you in this case, the reason this case is the way it is because the state didn't expect anyone to care about Mr. Faust. They didn't expect anyone to do the work for Mr. Faust. They did not expect anybody to take Mr. Faust's case seriously. Once they showed, hey, this is the person that committed this terrible act, what they expected was probably a 2-day trial. Expected some guy to just come in here and say, oh, this client is terrible, we don't care. They expected you all to come in here, and they truly, they expected you all to come in here and say, hey, his DNA is enough, I'm done. That's what they expected. That's the only reason they would bring you a case so weak. And that's why we said in opening, speculations aren't allowed here, right? We have to follow the law. We have to look at the evidence because they wanted you as jurors to just say his DNA is enough. He did it. He did it. That's it. That's our case. And that's why they spend so much time in opening talking about these numbers. Oh, it's so big. It's this, it's that. Because they want you to say, we don't care about the evidence. His DNA is enough. The state could do that. You are the protectors of this community. We don't do that. If we put people away, we put them away with evidence. It's rules to the law. They have to follow the law. And you tell them, bring us the evidence. Because we're going to do our jobs. We're going to abide by our oaths. They want you to convict on emotion, speculation, assumptions. They want you to believe Mr. Faust has to explain his DNA. The judge is going to tell you he absolutely does not. And the way she's going to frame it is Mr. Faust doesn't have to present any evidence. They have the burden of proof. And thank you for your patience. I am wrapping up. I asked you for a few more minutes. 16. The next principle I'd like to discuss with you is the presumption of innocence. That is a very, very, very powerful principle. In America, every person that has to be charged with a crime is presumed innocent. And we do that for humanitarian reasons. It would be terrible for someone who didn't know anything about a case to presume that someone is guilty. to presume that someone committed something just because they are charged with the offense. That would be considered inhumane because not only would that happen to me, that would happen to everyone. So when we became a country, in our Constitution, it was written that every single person charged with a crime is to be presumed innocent. And again, I told you, it covers him from the top of his head to the bottom of his feet. So the state's evidence could rip off the chest plate of that armor of Mr. Faust. It could rip off an arm. It could rip off a leg. It could rip off the helmet of that armor. But if there's a piece on the elbow, if there's a piece of armor left on the knee, just as Mr. Faust walked in here and met you all 3 weeks ago, that presumption is not guilty. So how much evidence does it take to rip off that suit of armor? And who has to present that evidence to rip off that suit of armor? And we've already discussed that the state has the burden of proof. And the next principle I would like to discuss with you is the burden of proof. The state has all the resources, okay? Mr. Faust is a single individual. All of us are single individuals. The state, they have the power of the state. They have the money of the state. So when it comes to bringing cases, they have the power. They have the resources. That's why they have the burden of proof. So where's all the evidence that they have to marshal in with so much power to say that this person committed this crime? It's not a flip of the coin. It's not a maybe I believe he did it. Maybe he did it. He might have did it. They have to bring in so much evidence that it rips off that entire suit of armor. And that standard is known as proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And we discussed what proof beyond a reasonable doubt means. The judge is going to tell you the lack of evidence. The lack of evidence. If there's some evidence you want to see that you don't see, the lack of evidence is a reason to doubt. And you tell the prosecutor, you didn't prove your case. Don't ask me to convict someone when you don't present the evidence. Ladies and gentlemen, it is your verdict. This is your courtroom. It is your decision as a body. And I told you in opening, I was going to ask you individually and as a body to render a not guilty verdict for Mr. Faust. You're going to get a verdict form, and I believe but you're going to receive a verdict form, and I'll show you the verdict form once we get it. And it's going to have a line. And it's going to say, we the jury find Mr. Faust, and it may say defendant, it may have a generic term, not guilty or guilty. And you, individuals, will write in not guilty or guilty. All 12 of you on the jury panel have to agree to a verdict. Don't surrender your verdict. If you feel that your position is truthful, whatever it may be, don't surrender your verdict. Don't say, okay, it's 4:45 on a Friday, I'm ready to go home. Thank you. Let's just go ahead and check this off because I want to go. Don't do that, because once you render your verdict, that's it. You can't come back and fix it. You cannot come back and fix it. So you took an oath. Follow that oath. I know each and every one of you will, because otherwise Mr. Faust would not have chosen you to sit on the jury. He would not have chosen you to decide his fate. I took an oath as well, and I didn't stand up to take my oath, but I also took an oath. And I'm going to have things to tell you. The prosecution is going to get up. They're going to make their argument. But due to the rules, I cannot say another word to you. This is my last time. This is Mr. Faust's last time have an opportunity to say anything to you. So they're going to say things that I am going to disagree with, but I won't have another opportunity to speak with any of you. I may think of something later that I forgot to say, but Mr. Faust trusts you. He trusts you with his life. We trust you. I want to thank you for your time and your devotion to this community, the United States of America, as well as the state of Georgia. In regards to malice murder, which is count 1, we ask you to vote not guilty. In regards to felony murder, count 2, we ask that you vote not guilty. In regards to felony murder, count 3, we ask that you vote not guilty. In regards to felony murder, count 5, we ask that you vote not guilty. In regards to burglary, count 6, we ask that you vote not guilty. In regards to aggravated sodomy, count 7, we ask that you vote not guilty. In regards to rape, count 8, we ask that you vote not guilty. In regards to aggravated assault, count 9, we ask that you vote not guilty. In regards to aggravated sodomy, count 10, we ask that you vote not guilty. In regards to arson in the first degree, count 11, we ask that you all vote not guilty. In regards to possession of a knife during the commission of a felony, we ask that you vote not guilty. Court's indulgence. And forgive me, I skipped count 4. Count 4, felony murder, it's the exact same thing. We're asking that you all vote not guilty. There was something that I didn't mention. I was trying to be considerate of you all's time and kind of get through the argument. But there was something said by Agent Bigham, and I'll end on this note. She stated that Chris Melton's DNA was supposed to be there. There was her statement to you all when we asked about the DNA. Something that isn't appropriate in this case is to assume that because someone is a boyfriend and the timeline doesn't fit, that they are entitled to someone's body. Ms. Baker could tell Mr. Melton no. His DNA being there doesn't automatically mean he has access to her. And I would tell you all to reject that statement from Ms. Bigham, but also use that to judge her credibility. She would rather tell you that Mr. Melton's DNA is supposed to be there, despite it being in a place he said that it shouldn't be, right? They're saying, hey, this guy may not have committed this crime. She chose Mr. Faust's DNA as the DNA that shouldn't be there versus the guy that told her, yeah, my DNA shouldn't be there. That isn't anything that she did. But I submit this case to you all. I want to thank you all for your time, your attention, and your patience with me throughout this trial. On an ending note, if I have done anything to offend anybody, please forgive me. Hold it against me. Don't hold it against my client. I truly apologize. I promise you it was not intentional. But again, I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank you for leaving your lives to hear this case. We trust you. We ask that you find Mr. Faust not guilty.
Thank you, Your Honor. If it pleases the court. On January 19th of 2021, Tara Baker was going through her morning routine. What we know about Tara is that she was a very detail-oriented person, a very routine-oriented person, and she liked to get up around 6:30 in the morning, and she'd take a shower. She'd eat her breakfast of cheese grits, good Southern staple. And then she'd go to her room to blow dry her hair, and that's something that would take her a while because she had so much hair. And there's no way that she could have known that she would have never gotten through that. At that point, the defendant, Edrick Faust, entered her home and attacked her from behind with a knife. You heard from Dr. Falzon, who talked to you about the mechanism of that injury and the fact that it would have pierced her jugular vein and would have come from behind in this manner, which is consistent with the defensive wound that she has to her left hand. After he then bashed her head and strangled her and sexually assaulted her, Mr. Faust tried to cover his tracks. He tried to clean up as much as he could. He took the stove knobs off the stove where he had turned them on in order to light a blanket on fire and then light her bedroom on fire. And he exited the residence. He lived just under 2 football fields away, 585 feet. And he was likely very surprised that the home did not catch on fire the way that he expected it to. And he circled the neighborhood, wondering when this blaze would actually reach its full peak, and worried that it was not. And what you heard from Brian Grove, the ATF fire engineer in this case, is that under the environment that Mr. Faust had created, this would be a slow developing fire. It would be a fire that would be fed through the cycling on and cycling off of the HVAC system until the temperature reached such a level that it would cause a breakout in that top pane, which you have seen from the pictures, which then would create a ventilation increase that would let the fire reach its full level. This was all done in an effort to conceal his crime. Mr. Faust, when he committed this crime, did not take a weapon with him. He did not take elements to clean up after himself with him, the way that someone, if they had planned a crime over the course of several days to arrive in the middle of the night, would have done. The fire department arrived not knowing that they would find what they found inside. They entered the home. It was a home that was filled with smoke. They identified by looking around the home that the source of origin had to be in bedroom 3, Miss Baker's bedroom. They forced entry into Miss Baker's bedroom, and when they did, what they found was something that they were not ready for. They backed out. They called the police department. The police arrived on scene to find the badly burned and beaten, stabbed and strangled body of Miss Tara Baker. As it related to her murder, the evidence was always there. The world and technology just needed time to catch up to be able to deliver justice for her, and that's why we're here. That's why we've taken the time and asked you to take the time out of your lives to present the evidence that we have presented over the last 2 weeks that shows that Mr. Faust murdered Tara Baker. The police thoroughly processed the scene when they arrived. Although now Mr. Cruz wants to claim that this is a case about indifference, he wants to claim that this is a case about the ball being dropped and carelessness. In his opening statement, he called this one of the most thorough investigations in the history of the state of Georgia. What's changed is that the evidence against his client has been laid out, nothing else. It's one thing to pay lip service to law enforcement and first responders. It's another thing to actually recognize what the work they do, what kind of toll it takes on them. Where's the indifference in Lieutenant Liedall telling you he can still smell the shampoo in her hair? Where's the indifference in Bill Ricketts telling you that unlike a Super Bowl or a World Series, things like this are things that you never forget? Not only did the police use all of the tools and technologies that were available to them, you've heard from Agent Howe that they used innovative techniques, like trying to get fingerprints off Miss Baker's body using a negative lift technique. You've heard from both Lieutenant Liedall, who's well recognized in his field, as well as Agent Howe, who's well recognized in his field, that this is possibly the worst type of evidence or worst type of environment that you could have for trace evidence collection. But they still attempted to do so. The water, the smoke, the fire, the ceiling debris that fell on them led to a situation where the only trace evidence hairs that they could find would be hairs that you would normally expect in the home in abundance, as was testified to, because these are people who were regularly in and out of the areas of the house. The transformer box is not the murder weapon. The ligature, which was tested for DNA and only had Miss Baker's DNA on it, the knife that was used to stab her, likely the footboard where her head were bashed against were the murder weapons in this case. Not a power transformer box that was connected to a printer. But Mr. Melton's hair was found there. It absolutely was found there. But as both of the detectives who worked forensics in this case, Agent Howe as well as Lieutenant Liedall, told you, you would fully expect to find hairs of individuals who are regularly in and out of the home in those areas. Also, Mr. Cruz wants to talk to you about why Miss Baker's own hairs were in her hand. Well, as you heard from Mr. Peterson, a well-renowned expert in hair analysis, that is very common. And I think if we take just a moment to consider what happens as soon as any of us gets hit in the head, it makes perfect sense. The first thing that happens when you get struck with something in the head is that your hand goes up to your head. And so when someone has bashed your head against something, causing a serious injury that is testified to as a medical examiner as a contributing factor, it makes perfect sense that your hand would go to where you were hurt. And it's perfectly consistent with the experience of experts who do hair analysis. As part of the processing the scene, the entire scene was processed for fingerprints. There were no usable prints found. The screen, which was tampered with in a manner that was consistent with removing it, was processed, but unfortunately no usable prints were found on that item as well. And as the case languished for over 20 years while the police were looking for new leads, that screen was lost. We didn't try to hide that from you. We owned it from the very beginning. All this happened before I could drive a car. If I could go back and make sure that screen stayed in evidence, I absolutely would, but we can't. We have the case that we have. And I think it's important to talk about evidence, right? Mr. Cruz has access to the same physical evidence that the state has access to. And the defense has no obligation whatsoever to present any evidence. But he has access to that same evidence log that Agent Bigham made part of her case file. So if Mr. Cruz wanted you to see the keys, the defense has the opportunity to present that. It's in evidence, as Agent Bigham testified to. If Mr. Cruz wanted you to see the lock, he could present that. It's in evidence. But that's not what he wants because they're irrelevant, and he knows that. What he wants is to create the type of conspiracy theory that he's just told you in his closing argument you shouldn't follow as being reasonable doubt. And so I'm going to ask you in your deliberations to hold him to that. The police knew from early in the investigation. The autopsy happens the next day, and even when they arrive on the scene, it seems very likely to them that Miss Baker had been sexually assaulted while she was in the process of dying. As part of the autopsy conducted by Dr. Faust, he photographed and described injuries that indicated that Miss Baker was stabbed from behind, strangled, and beaten, as well as sexually assaulted with forcible injuries, not just to her anus, but also her vagina. A fact that for some reason the defense regularly ignores and doesn't want you to think about. Dr. Faust, due to the fact that there were injuries and indications of sexual assault, did what he always does, which is to take oral swabbings, vaginal swabbings, and anal swabbings. Unfortunately, when the envelope was labeled, two things got labeled as oral swabbings, but we know that we have a vaginal smear as part of the evidence in this case. And there can be no vaginal smear without a vaginal swabbing. That's impossible. And so that's how everyone knows that one of those oral swabbings was a vaginal swabbing. In his opening statement, Mr. Cruz tried to tell you that the injuries to Mr. Melton's hands are from when he is strangling Miss Baker and she is clawing at his hands, and that the hairs in her hand are from in that fight against her attacker reaching up and pulling his hair out. He physically demonstrated that to you during your opening statement, during his opening statement. How does that comport with what the actual evidence in the case is? It doesn't. Okay? And I don't want you to take any of this as some kind of attack by me on Mr. Cruz. Mr. Cruz has an incredibly important and constitutionally mandated job in this case, and that's to make sure, regardless of what the evidence is, that he does everything he possibly can to walk Mr. Faust out that door, even though he murdered Tara Baker. And that should be his job.
You may.
That is his job as mandated by the Constitution, and he is doing it as he should. But you have a different job, and I have a different job. My job is to look at the evidence, see where it leads, and then bring that before you so that you can deliver a verdict that speaks the truth. That's my job. Mr. Cruz has tried to manufacture moments of doubt for you. He has the same evidence log that Agent Biggin put in her case file that indicates that there were envelopes in which hairs were put and sent to the GBI, and that there are slides containing hairs that were done for analysis. Okay? And so this theater of opening up envelopes and creating what could be seen in out of context as some kind of moment of missing evidence is just a complete fabrication. The very next question we asked Lieutenant Liedall was, well, I mean, those are the envelopes you packaged the hairs in. You got any idea what the GBI did with them when you sent them over there? No. Then, as soon as we called the GBI witness, what did they all tell you? They almost looked at myself and Mr. Bolden like we had three heads when we asked them, well, I mean, after you take the hairs out of the envelope, you put them on the plating slide, you analyze them, do you then deplate them, put them back in the envelopes that they came in and send them back to the police department? And all of them looked at us and said, no, we don't do that. They remain plated. Well, because of course they do. Because hairs are biological evidence, and they will degrade over time if you maintain them in an environment after they've been sent for analysis in which they are not controlled. And so they stay longer on the plating and the glass. I'm sorry the slides broke. I mean, I think you could all see me and my anxiety level in the courtroom when we started taking the slides out of the protective cases because I was terrified that they would break. But it's been 25 years since this happened. And this case was cold for over 2 decades. It's something that's unfortunate that they cracked. But as everybody testified to, they were not cracked when they were analyzed, and it did not affect the integrity of the evidence. Ultimately, with the technology that was available over 25 years ago, law enforcement and the crime lab did not have the technology and tools with adequate sensitivity to identify the biological evidence that had been collected and preserved in the oral, vaginal, and anal swabbings that were taken. And we had to wait on the tools and technology to catch up. Besides collecting the physical evidence in the case, the police also did a canvass of the neighborhood. They did a canvass to see if anyone had seen anything, and they recorded whatever anyone would say. But at the time, they didn't have any leads to go on that yielded anything fruitful. They looked at every person of interest they possibly could. And this idea that political pressure is the reason we're here right now, if the police had allowed political pressure to guide their decisions, they would have arrested someone 25 years ago, but they didn't. They followed the evidence. They followed the evidence in the case. What we would ultimately learn is that Mr. Faust lived less than 2 football fields from Miss Baker. He lived just 585 feet with a direct line of sight to her home. We've learned that the description given by several witnesses in the area was consistent with Mr. Faust. At the time, we did not have him as a person of interest because he appeared nowhere in this case file that has tens of thousands of pages in it and over 100 hours of interviews. We would learn eventually that the sketch created by renowned forensic sketch artist Marla Lawson, based on the descriptions that were given by the people who saw Mr. Faust walking around the neighborhood, were consistent with Mr. Faust's appearance as it was just 2 weeks or so after the crime was committed. And we would learn that there's no connection of any kind before the morning of January 19th of 2001 between Mr. Faust and Tara when he left his DNA inside of her home after he had killed her. We learned that Mr. Faust's DNA was present in Tara's mouth and vagina, even though he denied ever having spoken with her or had any contact of any kind with her or anyone who lived in Deer Park. We learned that when he was given an opportunity to explain why his DNA was present, an opportunity that the defense has repeatedly said he was not provided, Mr. Faust chose instead to end the interview by asking to be taken to jail. But unfortunately for the Baker family and for everyone who knew, cared for, and loved Tara, it would take us decades to know those things about Mr. Faust and to know that he had killed and sexually assaulted Tara Baker. Law enforcement began doing everything that they possibly could to catch a break in this case. They began constructing a timeline of Tara's whereabouts, a timeline that the defense doesn't want you to pay attention to. Police also talked to Tara's roommates, Ashley and Valerie, and they told the police that no one had a key to the home besides the 3 roommates. Ashley in particular was very close to Tara, going all the way back to when they were in the same sorority at Georgia College. I think Ashley would have considered Tara her best friend, and she would have thought that the same was true of Tara. Ashley told you that Tara and Chris had a good relationship with nothing other than normal ups and downs of any relationship, especially one that had lasted as long as Tara and Chris's had, and that they were trying to find ways, as many people do in their early 20s, coming out of college, stepping into an environment where your academic challenges are much more significant, both in the stress and also the long-term impacts of it, and also into the world of working and trying to build a business for yourself, to do something good for the future that you hope to share with someone. And that Chris's work demands and Tara's school demands had made it to where they weren't able to spend as much time as they'd like to together. And that's probably one of the reasons that Tara was so excited about seeing Chris that weekend for her birthday, something that Ashley told you and that Chris told you. Police knew from speaking with Katie Lowenstein, who you heard from, someone who told you that her and Tara's friendship was one that started pretty much on the first day of law school and grew quickly through the crucible that is your first year. I mean, I remember my first year. I still have some of the best friends in my life from that time in law school because you're spending 11 or 12 hours going to class and studying, and you have this incredible pressure of performing in a very highly competitive environment in front of other people who are your peers, and it causes people to bond very quickly. You could see that in the pain that this still causes Katie 25 years later. And she told you that in all the time and experience that she had with Tara, the only impression that she got from Tara about her relationship with Chris is that it was a good, positive thing. She also told you, importantly for the timeline, that Tara was very committed that semester to her academic performance. She was going to be at the law library till 10 p.m. every night. Even when Katie left that night at about 9:15 or 9:30 to go home, Tara was staying, because Tara was a routine-oriented person and a detail-oriented person and an incredibly hard worker who said she was going to stay at the law library until 10 p.m. and who had class the next morning. Katie told you about the type of friend that Tara was. You know, every friend group, I feel like, has the mom or dad friend who kind of watches out for everybody. And that's who Tara was. When she didn't call Tara when she got home, Tara called her. And we know that happened at 9:46 p.m. Tara also talked to you about the plans that they had for that Friday night and how Tara was excited about the weekend. As police investigated the case, as you've heard, they looked at Chris hard from the very beginning. That's where the police always look first, is at the romantic relationship or someone in a close relationship with the victim. You've heard that. Chris cooperated fully with police. Mr. Cruz claims that he didn't talk to Miss Virginia, Tara's mother. Well, that's not true at all. The way he found out is he called Miss Virginia back while he was at Truck Customs, and she told him what happened, and his first instinct was to go to the last place that anyone knew Tara to be. And so he went. And on the way, he called her roommates, trying to find them, calling their families, trying to see whether this was Tara or someone else. Chris wanted to cooperate because he thought by cooperating and giving as much information as he possibly could, it would move this investigation towards finding the person who killed Tara. He didn't know at the time that it would take 23 years, but it did. Chris and Tara had met at Georgia College. They hadn't gotten really serious until they both moved home. They had worked through a long-distance relationship. They had found a way to be together. And Chris had to move closer to where his work was once he decided to take the step, once he had found his place in the world in plumbing, to be something more than just working for someone else. He wanted to be something more because he was inspired and motivated by the way that Tara lived her life. And, you know, to Ashley, she sat up on the stand and she told you, you know, to me, it kind of seemed like it was a relationship that seemed destined to end. And I could see that. I mean, I'm sure Tara's family may not have felt that Chris, without a college degree and as a plumber, wasn't good enough for this woman who, by all accounts, sprinted ahead of the field all the time. She was on a mission to do the things that she wanted to do. But in this world, it does not matter what people on the outside of a relationship see or what they feel or expect. What matters is how the two people feel about each other. And what we know about how Tara felt about Chris and what Chris felt for Tara was that they loved each other, regardless of whether the world thought that they were similarly yoked or mismatched or anything else. And am I telling you that two kids that were 23, 24 years old were definitely going to get married and go on to live, you know, together for the next 60 years until they pass away in bed next to each other? No, you don't know what people are going to do or how life is going to unfold. But what I'm telling you is there is not one shred of evidence, not one single shred of evidence that indicates that Chris Melton was angry with Tara, would hurt Tara, or wanted her dead. In fact, the exact opposite is what her best friend said. She said, he was the sweetest guy in the world. I never saw him be anything but kind towards her. You know, I do think it's interesting that Mr. Cruz wants to tell you that a stamped, timed transaction from a bank that is over an hour from Athens that blows a giant hole in the middle of his timeline isn't relevant. Because to me, it is the most objective, relevant piece of evidence about Chris Melton's alibi. An alibi that is solid. An alibi that you can't call unconfirmed because Josh McCurdy confirms all parts of Chris's alibi for the morning of the murder. And Chris's father, who Mr. Cruz did not mention one single time in his closing argument, also told police that Chris was home that morning and he saw Chris get in the car with Josh McCurdy. Mr. Cruz knew that, which is why he needed to make this relationship between Josh and McCurdy and Chris Melton, who were work friends who never hung out outside of work, something more than it was. You'll recall in cross-examination, Mr. Cruz repeatedly asking David Griffith, the crime analyst with the Athens Clark County Police Department, well, they went to high school. You didn't know they went to high school together? They went to high school together. The words that the attorneys say are not evidence. The evidence in this case is that, in fact, they did not go to high school together and that they were just work friends who had known each other for a year. There's also this twisting of what people have said and what it means. Chris Melton said he had known Josh McCurdy for a year from working together in the same crew for someone else. And about a month before Tara was murdered, he had talked to Josh about coming to work for him. That's what the evidence is in the case, not some inconsistency between when Chris says he met Josh and when Josh says he met Chris. Josh picked him up. They go, and you've heard from Bill Ricketts, you've heard from David Griffith, that it is not unusual. People do not timestamp their lives for there to be some inconsistencies in when people went certain places or the order in which they went to certain places, or people to leave things out. If Chris was trying to manufacture an alibi, why in the world would he have not told the police about the bank until Sunday? It's because on Friday when he was talking to the police and he's trying to recall everywhere that he was that morning in the middle of this tragedy, he forgot. That's a completely normal thing, and you've heard the investigators testify about that. They go around, the rain prevents them from doing all of the work they need to do. They go to truck customs before lunch. They go to truck customs again after lunch, may have stopped by quickly right before lunchtime as well. And that's the point at which Chris gets a page from Miss Virginia Baker, Tara Baker's mom, and he goes straight to Athens. The police ask him to go to the scene and identify the body. He tells them he does not want to. When asked, and Mr. Cruz again is trying to twist Mr. Melton's words, he did not say, I didn't want to see the damage I had caused. He said he didn't want to see the damage he had caused. So Chris goes to the scene to ID Tara so that her family won't be forced to do it. After that, he goes to the police department because he wants to tell them whatever he can. He wants this crime to be solved more than he wants anything else in the world. Police listen to what Chris has to say, and the very next day start calling Bill Teeter and Josh McCurdy, who are the people that he identified, and they confirm the major points of his alibi. They later confirm his alibi further with his father and even further with the objective evidence from the bank. The evidence about the time of travel that the defense doesn't want you to know, doesn't want you to consider, because it blows a giant hole in everything that they're saying. When he came back on January 21st of 2001 to give that blood sample and to be interviewed further, he was talking to the same police officer, Bill Ricketts, who he saw on the first day. The police officer that showed you how he would roll his hands by touching each and every finger on January 19th, the day that Tara was murdered, each and every one, something that's recorded in Bill Ricketts' police report 23 years before Edrick Faust ever shows up in this case. That's the other thing the defense is trying to do. They're trying to act like all of these facts existed in the same environment, in the same moment, and that is not true. Bill Ricketts' police report indicating that he fingerprinted Chris Melton is from the time that he fingerprinted Chris Melton. It's nothing manufactured. It is an accurate recording of exactly what he did. And what he told you is that he and no other police officer that testified or any police officer in the Athens-Clarke County Police Department or GBI or anywhere else saw any injuries to Chris's hands. The things they would have absolutely been looking for because they were looking at him as a person of interest. Unfortunately, nothing broke. They couldn't get anything, and the case went cold. But eventually we caught up. Through the determination of a family in the face of unimaginable tragedy, through the fierce and unwavering love of a mother, Tara would not be forgotten. And the long and difficult journey to find justice for her and accountability for her murderer, Mr. Faust, never ended. The GBI Cold Case Unit was created to bring in fresh eyes and to use modern technology and tools to investigate cases where all leads have been exhausted and no likely perpetrator has been identified. I want to back up because I left something out on Chris's interview with Bill Ricketts on January 21st. He tells Bill Ricketts on January 21st that he and Tara had sex for the last time Saturday night into Sunday morning. That's what he says 2 days after the murder. That's what Bill Ricketts testified to here. So this idea, this false idea that somehow the first time that Chris Melton ever said that he had had sex with Tara within roughly 5 days of her being killed by Mr. Faust was in 2024 because Agent Bigham put that idea in his mind is completely untrue. It is completely false. Agent Bigham was reminding someone, as they would do for any witness in any case that had taken 23 years for them to talk to them for the first time, of the fact that, you know, hey, at the time you said this, okay? And if Mr. Melton was trying to make up a story in order to make things make sense, then he would have just followed their direction. But here's the really interesting part about that. They were wrong at the time, and they just didn't know it yet as far as where the DNA was found, okay? And Mr. Cruz, although he's saying to you that he doesn't want to follow any conspiracy theories and that conspiracy theories are about reasonable doubt, is also trying to tell you that the time that the police and the crime lab were able to determine that what they thought about where the DNA was came from Agent Bigham, that's not true at all. You heard Ashley Hinkle testify on May 10th, the day after they interviewed Mr. Faust. The day after, they go back and they get a known sample. They take the known sample to the crime lab and they run it. And then what did Ms. Hinkle tell you? She's got these two things that are both labeled as oral swabs, but they're showing different results on profile. So what does that indicate to her in the context? Context is important of what we know about the rest of the evidence. We know from the medical examiner's report that there were vaginal, oral, and anal swabs taken. So I've got these two oral swabs. They're showing different results. This says that there are oral, vaginal, and anal swabs, and I've got a vaginal smear. Well, then one of these is not an oral swab. It's actually the vaginal swab. Well, how do we figure that out? Agent Bigham did an expert shot. If there were evidence of that, then Mr. Cruz has the ability to present it. No obligation, but the ability to, but there's not. They want the specter of things that they know not to be true. And so Agent Bigham takes the direction of the crime lab that says you should go see these people at Pure Gold. They're good at what they do, and they do it for all sides. And she sent the samples to Pure Gold. So we've got the two oral samples, and we'll talk about, go to the next slide. No, you're fine. Oral swabbings A, which was 2J at the crime lab. The profiles identified the first fraction skin cells.
Yes.
like Kira Sims, she's a GBI crime lab scientist who testified that the first fraction skin cells, second fraction sperm, the first fraction matches Tara Baker. That makes sense. These are swabbings that are taken from the person of Tara Baker. Second fraction, Chris Melton, 1 in 8 octillion, Edrick Faust, 1 in 70 billion. So Mr. Melton's fraction longer, both, they're about, I believe, 7 or 8 billion people on the planet Earth. So just to put some context on that. Oral swabbing A when it gets to pure gold forensics. Okay. What does pure gold forensics do? They do a saliva test, a scientifically accepted test to determine where oral swabbings A came from. All right? It is positive for vaginal epithelial cells. So now it's negative for saliva and positive for vaginal epithelial cells. So now we know that oral swabbings A, which is item J, and this is the part where, you know, we got to figure out a new way to label things, I think. But oral swabbings A, which is item J, is an item that is the vaginal swabbings. Science led us here. Science identified the issue, science clarified the issue, because science is always advancing and science is objective. Mr. Cruz says that you should follow the science, but then he's trying to distort for you what the science did and how we got here. As it relates to oral swabbing B, which is crime lab item 2I, profile, first fraction skin cells, second fraction sperm, first fraction matches Tara Baker. That makes sense. It comes from Tara Baker's person. Second fraction is placed into CODIS. That's the National DNA Database. On April 30th of 2024, Mr. Faust is identified as the major contributor. 1 in 30 octillion. A number that it's really, I mean, it's hard to put a number that large into context, but a number so large as to, you know, have a number of zeros behind it that I've never seen in any other context than DNA testing. Oral swabbing B, same thing, same process that they get put through pure gold. Even though we've already identified that oral swabbings A is vaginal, from the vaginal epithelial cells and from the non-presence of saliva, go through the same process with oral swabbing B. We're not going to make an assumption here. Positive for saliva, and then positive for human amylase, which is a compound primarily found in saliva and consistent with saliva. That's how we separated these two things. It has nothing to do with what needed to happen in order for an investigation to move forward or anything along those lines. Those are the types of conspiracy theories that Mr. Cruz himself has already told you is not reasonable doubt, but signaled the desperation of the defense to create and manufacture some doubt. Now, Mr. Cruz did ask Ms. Sims on cross-examination if she was aware that the GBI had done a test that showed that there was no sperm. What he failed to give her was the context that this was a test done in 2001, completely different equipment than what they do use right now. And, you know, Ms. Sims is probably younger than I am, and so, you know, I doubt that she has any familiarity besides reading in a textbook what the GBI was doing back in 2001. But we brought in Dr. Jennifer Corsi to testify. I was afraid for a minute I was going to mess up her last name there, but I think I got it right. To testify about the testing that they did do at the time, and yes, it was not positive at the time, but it was a less sensitive test than what they have available now. And that's what led to Mr. Faust. Not anyone trying to pin anything on anybody. But on April 30th, and I think it's important for you to keep this in mind, on April 30th, the GBI had an indication that they knew who had killed Tara Baker. But they didn't go arrest that person immediately. What they did is start to scour the case file again. Did we miss something that Edrick Faust and Tara Baker were connected in some kind of way? Did we miss something? Like, let's look through. And they spent 9 days before they arrested Mr. Faust, someone who had committed one of the most brutal murders in the history of Athens, Clarke County. They spent 9 days trying to run down any explanation they could possibly conceive of through the largest case file in one of the most thoroughly investigated cases in the history of the state of Georgia. And they couldn't. They couldn't establish one link between the two of them, because until the morning of January 19th of 2001, there was no link between Edrick Faust and Tara Baker, other than she lived close and he saw one car in the driveway. After that, they re-interviewed Ashley Hall. They re-interviewed Valerie Lowe. They re-interviewed Chris Melton, who was in the middle of watching his father, who was very close to die. His father passed away about 2 weeks after he was re-interviewed. They ended up, over the course of this investigation, as Agent Bingham testified to, re-interviewing about 30 witnesses, trying to make sure that they did as thorough a job as they possibly could. And then Mr. Faust was arrested, and he was given an opportunity to explain any connection he could have possibly had to Miss Baker. He denied initially knowing anything about a murder in that area. And think about this. This is a place where he had lived for 40 years. They've been talking about Deer Park throughout the interview. And then they're talking about a murder. And then all of a sudden, he says, oh, you're talking about that murder oh yeah, the law student at UGA who lived right over there. Oh yeah, now I know what you're talking about, but I don't know anything about her. I saw her in the newspaper, but I don't know anything about that or anything else. They asked her, you ever had any contact of any kind with her? No, none. And then came the moment when he was confronted with something then he knew he couldn't explain without telling the truth. And that's that his DNA was inside Miss Baker's body, inside of her home. And he was asked by Agent Howell, help me understand. I'm here to exonerate just as much as I am to hunt. Help me understand. And his response was, take me to jail. Because he knew at that point that he had finally been caught. The next day, we've already talked about Agent Howell and Agent Bingham took the sample of Mr. Faust's DNA pursuant to a search warrant. They submitted that to the GBI crime lab, and that's when this issue with oral swabbings being mislabeled as vaginal swabbings was identified. We've talked about this manufactured doubt, the hair envelope versus the slides, the keys and the locks, Josh and Chris being friends from high school, which was completely untrue, trying to distort the way in which the DNA was mislabeled and claiming that people somehow moved DNA around, which is just a red herring conspiracy theory, the mischaracterization of what hair was. Because in the mitochondrial DNA, Mr. Cruz specifically was asking questions about whether or not Mr. Melton could be excluded. He's completely leaving out the fact that Ms. Hall, who was also a roommate of Ms. Baker's, also couldn't be excluded. The bodies on Tara's hair, I think it's on Tara's body, the hairs on Tara's body. I got it out the last time. The hairs on Tara's body are really important here because I think they put Chris's hair on the power transformer box in context. Both of Tara's roommates were found to have hairs on Tara's body, okay? And I think that's important for context about the hair on the power transformer box, because it gives you an idea of how prevalent hairs from people who are normally in and out of a residence are. There's, obviously Miss Hall and Miss Lowe had nothing to do with Tara's murder. And I think obviously once you look at all the evidence, Chris Melton couldn't possibly have committed the crime. And so it's important when you're looking at that single piece of evidence to look at the totality of the evidence. The defense wants you to pick little things and look at them in isolation rather than looking at all of the evidence together. Here's another thing about the evidence that I think is really, really important. It has to do with Ashley Hinkle's testimony, which is being mischaracterized by the defense. Mr. Melton's DNA is in Tara's vagina, okay? Only Mr. Faust's DNA is in the mouth. Mr. Melton and Mr. Faust's DNA is in the vagina. And then Mr. Melton's DNA is found at a rate, and I want you to think, again, totality of the circumstances, 1 in 60,000 as opposed to billions and octillions in the anal swabbing. What Ms. Hinkle testified is that that timer resets with penetration. She's not talking about penetration of the anal cavity by Chris Melton. What she's talking about is there's a 7-day detection timeline in the vagina. So when Mr. Faust rapes Miss Baker vaginally, 5 days after Mr. Melton and Miss Baker have had sex at her parents' house, that is the point at which the timer starts, when Mr. Faust has committed the rape. That's when it resets to, not this point middle of the week or that Saturday before. That's not what she was testifying to. That's not what the evidence is. And I would submit to you that when you're talking about matches in the tens of billions, 70 billion and octillions, and then you're talking about a fragment or a sample of DNA so small that it reduces to 1 in 60,000, you're talking about the type of DNA sample that comes from transfer or from drainage after a rape has occurred by Mr. Faust. That's completely consistent with the physical evidence. Mr. Cruz has tried to make a big issue out of Mr. Melton's hands. We've already talked about Bill Ricketts said, no, those injuries were not there on the 19th. But also think about how what Mr. Cruz has told you about the manner in which those injuries arrived on Mr. Melton's hands is not accurate. The strangulation did not occur with Mr. Melton's hands. They occurred with a ligature that Mr. Faust was using. And what did Dr. Falzon tell you about where hands would be for a ligature strangulation? It was very quick. I saw a lot of people taking notes. A ligature strangulation, the hands would be on the sides because you were pulling the ligature tight. So this, which is what Mr. Cruz described for you, is wholly inconsistent with both the fact that she was stabbed from behind, likely the first injury when she was caught by surprise, had her head smashed against likely the bedpost, and then is on the ground semi-conscious being strangled. That's why there's no DNA except for her own underneath her fingernails, because she was largely incapacitated so early during this attack. That's why there aren't claw marks in Mr. Melton's face if she had been pulling at his hair wildly, as Mr. Cruz needs you to believe in order to show that his client didn't commit these crimes. He needs you to ignore the evidence. The reason that we asked y'all whether or not you believe that individuals, there's one right way to respond to trauma, is because, people respond to trauma in all kinds of different ways, okay? And I don't know if responding in a way that's different than what the majority of people would do is something that has really any evidentiary value that outweighs what the physical evidence and what other people are saying about the location of people tell us. Sorry, I took a lot of notes. There's been a lot made of the fact that we met with witnesses before trial. I mean, I'm unaware of any trial that's ever been conducted, certainly in a 25-year-old cold case homicide, where you wouldn't meet with the witnesses before you called them up to the witness stand. I mean, frankly, I'd fire anybody in my office who had a murder trial where they didn't meet with witnesses. So again, you can consider that in whatever capacity that you want, but it is a routine and expected practice, and it's basically malpractice not to talk to people before you call them as a witness in a trial. But again, that gets back to this, needing to throw these conspiracy theories out there. Mr. Melton's hands, why would you fingerprint him? The same reason that they collected hair samples from Valerie and Ashley and everybody else that's in and out of the house on the regular basis. It's so that if you have something, you have elimination samples. That was testified to during the course of the trial. Again, mischaracterizing the power transformer box as a murder weapon. It wasn't. I think all of these mischaracterizations, I think you should take in context of Mr. Cruz's own statement about if a person's not straight with you one time, then you're done with them forever. I mean, I think the defense has not been straight with you plenty of times during the course of this trial.
Okay, I'm going to overrule your objection. You may continue, Mr. Yellman-Chili.
And Mr. Cruz is absolutely correct that Mr. Faust has no obligation to explain his DNA. I mean, he doesn't have an obligation to do it. He can't without admitting that he committed this crime. I agree with him that the state has the burden, and, it doesn't ever shift to the defense, and they don't have to prove anything. But he was given an opportunity to explain his DNA in his interview. And what he told police, what he told the GBI is just take me to jail. And that's because there is no obligation. Will you cue up the video?
Which number is that, the last one?
Man, it's been a long time. We've made so many advancements and things. If you can help us understand why your DNA is in that house, help us. I don't want to put the finger on the phone. Help us. I'm here to exonerate just as much as I am to hunt.
Ja, kom ons weet hoe DNA.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've done everything we can with this case. It's gone through generations of police officers. We've run down everything we can with modern technology, and we've given you everything that you need to find Mr. Faust guilty beyond a reasonable doubt for each and every one of the offenses in this indictment. But my time with this pen is over. I can't write the last chapter. That's yours to do. Tara Baker was the kind of person who tried to bring happiness and joy to everyone in her life, everyone that she interacted with. She was someone so driven that she graduated with 2 degrees in 3 years. She was someone that had her entire life ahead of her, a life that she wanted to dedicate to helping people and making this world just a little bit better, one client at a time. And her loss isn't just a tragedy for her family. Her loss isn't just a marker that changed their lives forever. It's a loss for all of us. It's a loss for everyone in this community. It's, if she had settled somewhere else after she finished law school, it's a loss for that place. It's a loss for the world. And there's no measure of justice that we can provide that will change that. But what we can do and what we must do is speak the truth. That's what the word verdict means. It means to speak the truth. And the truth here is that Edrick Faust committed this horrific crime, that there was no connection between the two of them. There is no evidence of that whatsoever. And I'm asking you not to manufacture evidence the way that the defense has attempted to manufacture evidence in this case. Trust what you heard in the evidence from the witness stand and return that verdict that speaks the truth. And the truth is that Mr. Faust is guilty of each and every offense in this indictment. Thank you.